Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the South and West Plans Panel. My name is Councillor Hannah Bithell, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everyone that today's meeting is being live streamed on the Leeds City Council YouTube channel so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. South and West Plans Panel deals with applications from the south, northwest, and west of the city. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public, and council officers to help members of the panel make their decision. However, today we are here to discuss a position statement seeking members' views on the proposal at this point in its development as well. So could I therefore remind members, and I will do so again when that application comes up, that there won't be a vote or requirement for a formal decision on that particular item. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphone once you've introduced yourself? If we could start from my left, please.
Yes, good afternoon. My name's Adam Ward. I'm the team leader for Southwest team.
Hello, I'm John Booth. I'm Principal Engineer Highways.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Paul Ray from Hunsel and Riverside Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Andy Rowntree, Coastal Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Bromley, representing Horsforth and Rawdon.
Afternoon, Councillor John Garvani, Horsforth Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Killamanaka, Bermontoffs and Richmond Hill.
Good afternoon, Sarah Holmes. I'm part of the Plans Panel team.
Good afternoon, I'm Daniel Illingworth and I'm part of the Plans Panel team.
I'm Robert Finnegan. I'm a councillor for the Morley North Ward. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Councillor Lynn Buckley, Allwoodley Ward.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Trish Smith, Pudsey Ward.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha and I'm the clerk to the panel.
Afternoon, everyone. Nikki Dio, Legal Officer to the board.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Manager for South and West Leeds and lead officer at South and West Plans Panel.
Just for YouTube, we're just having a techie issue on Steve's card, if you didn't manage to hear him introduce themselves. Okay. The clerk will very shortly be able to introduce the next set of items, please.
Thanks, Chair. Agenda item 1, there's no appeals. Agenda item 2, there's no exempt items. Agenda item 3, there's no formal late items. Agenda item 4, can members declare any interest?
Yes. Thank you. The applicant on agenda item 7 is known to me in a professional capacity, having been in meetings with him, but I'll be chairing with an open mind and I'm just disclosing it for transparency for the panel and public.
Thanks, Chair. Agenda item 5, apologies from Councillor Taylor today. I've noticed that Councillor Campbell isn't here, but I've not received any apologies, so he might be late.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to item number 6, which is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 3rd of August 2023. Do members accept these minutes are a true and correct record? I'm seeing nods, thank you. I will in fact assume they are correct unless otherwise indicated. Are there any matters arising from those minutes? No? In which case, before we move on to item 7, I'm just going to ask Steve to come in around current agenda item 9. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. My apologies for intervening at this particular point, but last week we received towards the end of the week some more information, medical information relating to item number 9. This was received after the agenda papers were actually published, therefore it's a public document. But what I want to put to the members, because it is of significance where we think we need to actually reconsider the equalities impact assessment that's been carried out and possibly bring such a paper back as a pink paper, i.e. below the line just for your eyes only at a later date. I'm requesting that the application, item 9, is actually deferred at this point, and there's no further discussion on it today, and we'll come back with the revised documentation. I would just also apologise again to the applicant and anybody else that has an interest in the application. And we did contact them as soon as we could on Monday to advise them this may be a possibility, but I do need members to actually agree to that because it's effectively a revised motion.
So Councillor Rose proposed. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Gavani. Thank you. All those in favour? And that is unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant. In which case we will move on to agenda item number 7, which is a change of use from a dwelling C3 to children's care home C2 at number 8 Chatsworth Crescent. Can I ask Adam to present it, please?
Apologies for the delay. We're just getting the presentation together at the moment. Right, apologies for the delay, everyone. Can we have the first slide, please? Thanks. Right, this application was the subject of a panel site visit this morning that members observed on site, where I could look around the property in terms of external appearance, had a look around the back garden as well. It's a proposal for a change of use from a dwelling, which is use class C3, to a small children's home, which is class C2. That's a residential institution. So in terms of the background, the City Council, along with lots of other local authorities throughout the country, receive a reasonable amount of these types of application each year. And these are generally born out of the need to provide safe accommodation for children who've had a bad start in life for various reasons. And those children that are often removed from birth parents and taken into the care system. In terms of this specific site, as you can see from the plan in front of you and the red line that's outlined there, it's one half of a semi-detached 2-storey property that sits on a bend or on Chatsworth Crescent within the area of Pudsey. It's in an established residential area characterised by other detached and semi-detached properties, which range from bungalows to two-storey dwellings. So it's clearly in quite a suburban location. In terms of its current setup and use, there is a living room and a kitchen and a dining room on the ground floor, and upstairs there are 5 bedrooms and a bathroom. There's a driveway down the side of the property that leads underneath the first floor element through an archway that leads to a garage to the rear. So the current proposal is to convert this to a C2, a residential institution, and that would be to accommodate up to 3 children. And those would be typically aged between 10 and 16 years of age, but the applicant may on certain occasions be willing to take children ranging from 8 up to 17. It would be based on a 24-hour staffing rota system with 48 hours on and 48 hours off, with 2 staff permanently in the property at any one time, and at least one of them residing in the property on a shift basis, living in one of the bedrooms. So therefore, there could be a maximum of up to 3 children there at any one time, and a maximum of up to 3 staff there at any one time. And conditions are set out at the front of the report to control that. In terms of the proposal and how that's laid out, can we have the next slide, please? I'm just having problems. Thank you. It's no different than the current layout, in fact. So instead of 5 bedrooms being occupied or used on the upper floor, the proposal is to use 3 of the bedrooms for the children. So 1 of the bedrooms at the front, 2 of the bedrooms at the back, and the other rooms would be used as 1 of the bedrooms would be for the member of staff, and 1 would be a staff office. Downstairs would remain unaltered, which would be a living room at the front, together with a kitchen and a dining room to the rear. In terms of parking, there is space down the side for 3 to 4 vehicles, and the garden area towards the rear would be unaltered. So essentially, there are no physical changes to the house in terms of the internal configuration or externally, or any external changes to the garden or driveway. So it's purely a change of use of the property. In terms of the applicant's submission, they've said that each child is assessed for suitability to ensure that they're placed in the correct environment, and that the aim is to provide security and stability for young people in the care system. Now, members will have seen the report and the various objections that are raised by a number of local residents. It's pertinent to say that some of these issues which have been raised are material planning considerations, whereas some are not. I think the main issues for consideration for members here is whether you feel that the change of use of the premises to a children's home would give rise to any increased noise and disturbance over and above that which could be generated by use as a single family dwelling. So remember, this is currently a 5-bedroom house, which could potentially be occupied by a family, which could then potentially have 3, 4 or 5 children perhaps. So would the level of activity be significantly greater as to adversely impact on the living conditions of neighbours? We have received appeal decisions in the past on similar proposals for small children's homes, but appreciating all sites are different. And the inspector has concluded on some of these that the use of a dwelling for children's homes would not have an unacceptable impact on neighbours in terms of antisocial behaviour and excessive noise and disturbance. And on those occasions, there was no such evidence to suggest that. In order to assist members and separate out the issues which are material and the ones that aren't, and to give members some comfort on about regulation, which isn't a planning matter, but just to give you that comfort anyway, that regulation of these small children's homes comes under the jurisdiction of Ofsted. So essentially, if anyone wants to run one of these children's homes, they must register it with Ofsted and satisfy that they meet a number of legal requirements, including those in the Care Standards Act 2000 and also in the Children's Home Regulations 2015. So it is governed by other legislation and other guidance. And what an applicant needs to submit when they apply for a children's home through Ofsted is details of the provider, their safeguarding policy, their missing child policy, behaviour management policy, the location assessment, an equalities policy, insurance certificate, business plan, and also a copy of any planning permission or lawful development certificate. So in this instance, the applicant is applying for that planning permission, which will then enable them to go forward to Ofsted to register that children's home. So in summary, officers do not believe the scale and extent of the use of this particular property for up to 3 children would give rise to increased noise and disturbance to the extent that it would be significantly harmful to the amenity of adjoining residents. So to that end, officers have recommended that the application is approved, but with conditions to limit the number of children and limit the number of staff. I'll just finally add also, in addition to the report that members have received, we have received additional comments from colleagues in children's services who have noted that there are other children's homes in the LS28 postcode and neighbouring postcodes. They can't comment beyond that, but what they have said is that the plans and documents are consistent with the running of a children's home. So to that end, officers are content that the recommendation put forward is appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have a speaker against the proposal, Councillor Amanda Carter. You'll have 4 minutes once you're ready to put your case to panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amanda Carter and I represent the Carvely and Farsley ward. I've also been chair of Plans Panel, the centre of Plans Panel, and I sat on Plans West for a number of years. I also was the deputy chair of the Police and Crime Panel with responsibility for children's sexual exploitation and vulnerable children. And I have worked for Martin House Children's Hospice and worked with children with emotional difficulties. So I'm here to speak against this application, which is a semi-detached property, a residential home to turn into a children's home, which is a commercial venture. And let's be very clear about that, members. It is a cold and clinical commercial venture. The owner of this property is a businessman and he will be earning a great deal of money out of this property. That's why he's doing it. This panel did try to do the right thing recently and refused a children's home. I think it was in the Bramley area, Wellington, something or other. However, it went to appeal and it was allowed on appeal. I do have to take up issue with the inspector on this because there has been some evidence that's come to light contrary to what he said. What he said was, it is argued that the potential emotional and behavioural difficulties of a child at the property would contribute to adverse excessive noise and disturbance from within the property for neighbouring occupiers. However, I have seen no substantive evidence to support this. Furthermore, whilst children are likely to reside in the property and may have such difficulties, I find it unreasonable to assume that such behaviour and emotional needs would inevitably result in antisocial behaviour and excessive noise. Well, my experience of that is exactly the opposite, because children with emotional difficulties find it very difficult to articulate themselves, and they articulate themselves by causing antisocial behaviour because they're actually crying for help. They're saying, help me. They don't know how to say that. However, since that date, there has been a plethora of evidence from the BBC and The Guardian to state the contrary. In fact, there has been a comment by Anne Longfield, the former Children's Commissioner. The data set was released after a parliamentary question, shows that private businesses provided 69% of bed spaces in children's homes in England, but accounted for 76 of the serious incidents last year and 78 of the complaints over the last 3 years. Not-for-profit providers, such as councils and charities, provide 31% of bed spaces and accounted for 24% of serious incidents and 22% of complaints. So I'll let you do the maths on that. Anne Longfield, who is the former Children's Commissioner for England, said that a profit-driven care system was failing vulnerable children, and too many accommodated hundreds of miles from their homes and huge amounts of money leaking out children's services to private shareholders and owners. As I said, it's cold and clinical profit. She said the fact that some of these firms are getting involved in this market primarily because of the enormous profit that they come to make not to deliver the secure, local, therapeutic, responsive care these very vulnerable children desperately need. So that is the evidence that's come out since that last appeal. Following that, I do have some concerns about the highway. The property is actually on a bend, and we have a history of speeding there, a history of accidents. 2 cars have been hit very recently. When I was sitting on plans, planners were forever telling me that planning is an art, not a science. So it's not definite. It's not like a scientific question, or it's not like maths question. There is some leeway in it. I urge you, members, to defer this matter until you have looked into the evidence that I have referred to earlier and come back with the evidence, because that is clearly a planning material matter. In addition to that, last week at the Executive Board, the reason Children's Services say that they are overspending, the primary cause is because of these private homes. I'll leave it with you, members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Do members have any questions for Councillor Carter? Yes, Councillor Gavani.
Hopefully, Chair, you'll let me ask a couple of questions, or maybe even more. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Carter. I've read the comments that are in the panel papers from yourself and Councillor Andrew Carter, and they are quite interesting. Perhaps a bit of explanation on some of them. You've said close proximity to next door bungalow, which is a home of a disabled elderly lady. Now, as we heard from the officer, that's a 5-bedroom house, which could easily be 4 children, 2 adults. You could quite easily have a noisy family there. There could quite easily be children in that family with social and emotional problems. Is that would that be objected to?
No, you're talking about something quite different, aren't you? You're talking about some of the most vulnerable children in our society who've been taken away from their parents. If it was a family home, the parents would be there to support them. These children are the most vulnerable that you can get.
You mentioned, I think you mentioned about the rat running and highways problems. I fail to understand why that's an issue. Surely it's, and we were there today, we saw it is a fairly narrow road. They're talking about 2 adults on site. If each of those had a car, they can be parked off site. They say social services visits will be carried out off site. So the most you're talking of 2 cars which will be parked off road. Why is the highways point an issue?
It's a well-known rat run. Cars have been known to speed round there at 50 miles an hour. We're asking for speed humps. The residents are asking for speed humps. There's a school just down the road. You're right, there'll be 2 people, 2 carers parked on site. There are 3 children, room for 3 children, so that could be 3 children from 3 different authorities. So you would have 3 different care social workers coming to that site, plus other visitors as well. And it's not an easy get in or get out, and it's illegal to reverse out onto the highway. So cars would have to reverse in. They would be packed 1, 2, 3 behind each other. So they would have to move out if somebody else wanted to go earlier. So it wouldn't just be a straight case of like a family who goes out in the morning and comes back in the evening.
Well, it's purely hypothetical what authorities those children come from. They could be 3 Leeds children, all with the same social worker. Again, yes, it's a problem on the road round there. I live on a fairly tight road myself in the end of a cul-de-sac. It is a problem when there's a lot of cars. But again, the people who will be working there will be parking off street. I think that includes your comment about inadequate parking. We've heard, and I noted down here, that you could potentially park 4 cars on site. You could easily get 2. And if you've got a car that's capable of moving underneath the outbuilding, first floor extension, you could probably get at least another 2 cars out the back. So again, is inadequate parking really an issue?
Well, I'll explain very clearly what I think about the parking. However, my main concern is the vulnerable children who are in the property.
Councillor Gavani, you can have one more, make it a good one.
I'll leave it at that, Chair, till...
I knew you would when I put on my teacher voice. Councillor Finnegan.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the private sector providing care and support, I share some of your concerns based upon experiences in my own world, but could you develop your thinking a little bit more on that and why, in your view, it's slightly unusual coming from a Conservative, I have to say, but in your view, it doesn't work with children in care. To be honest, I don't think it works with adults being provided help and support. Certainly my personal experience, but if you could develop that theme a little bit further, perhaps.
Well, it's the evidence that I have discovered from the BBC and the Guardian and following the parliamentary question that gave me rise for concern that private and commercially developed homes for children were not serving children as well as charities and council provided homes. And the evidence is quite stark. Clearly, they make a lot of money out of these homes, and that is why they're erecting and they're building these homes for children. It's frightening. It's absolutely frightening that these children are cared for in this way and they're not receiving the services. I'm asking you to defer it so you can see the evidence for yourselves. Don't take my word for it. Have a look.
It's probably worth just mentioning at this point, although I'd love to sit here and debate the value of private versus public care. In planning terms, whether it is private or public, and I'm just looking over to check, it's the same in planning terms. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, under planning law, the identity of the applicant is not a material consideration for you. Draw out the points that Councillor Carter is making out in relation to the care, but please be aware that Adam has already set out that they must comply with statutory guidelines through various acts and regulations.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, I think I saw you next.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Carter, given the very built up area that this could potentially be placed within and the ages of the children that could potentially be placed there, what is there for them to do recreation wise to try and offset any antisocial behaviour that not necessarily they would cause, but could be caused within the area? Are you aware of anything?
Well, there isn't very much in the area to do. The application actually is in Pudsey, not Farsley, as it says in the report. There is quite a lot of issues in Pudsey at the moment with antisocial behaviour, with county lines, in fact, where vulnerable young children are being drawn into crime. In fact, there was a very nasty stabbing last year involving a very vulnerable child who had been coerced into county lines. So it is something that the police are working very hard to combat. It is extremely difficult, as you all know, to combat these drug groups. And it is a massive problem for us. So I do have concerns about that, but I didn't think it was a material consideration, so I didn't bring that up.
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't a material consideration, but of course, helpful for context. Do I have any other members who would like to ask any further questions of the speaker? No? Okay. In which case, do members have any questions for officers? Councillor Finnegan?
Para 6 talks about good public transport routes and frequency. Could you tell us what those are, Adam? One of the issues is you've got kids there, they're not going to be driving around, certainly not at that age. At this particular point, they need a quality bus service to be able to access whatever services and other things that they actually want to do. We need to know the regularity and frequency and possibly reliability of the bus services to serve these vulnerable children.
Yes, Councillor, it's been confirmed with myself, with my colleague from Highways. I can't give you that information. I'm not aware of the actual frequencies of every single bus number along that the routes in the area. So I'm unable to give you that information at the moment. All I would say is it is in a sustainable location in that there are lots of other residential properties in this location. So clearly, you know, there are people that utilise bus services in the area, and I would expect potentially the people who would occupy this would have the benefit and option of utilising existing services, appreciating I don't know the frequency.
Yeah, you can come back.
At the point where it says good public transport route and frequency, you can't say that because you can't say whether it's good, bad or indifferent because you don't know what those particular services are. And that is clearly a material planning consideration at this particular point. And as a result of which, taking into account the vulnerability of the children, the fact they're not going to be driving around and other such things, perhaps we ought to consider a deferral for that information, along with consideration of Councillor Carter's other suggestions at this particular point. So I'm happy to move that we do that and we defer for additional information.
Okay, have we got a seconder for deferral? Councillor Smith. Okay. Okay, all those in favour of deferring?
3.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And that leaves nobody to abstain. So that's not carried, in which case I'll bring in Councillor Rowntree.
Thank you, Chair. Adam, from your remarks earlier, I understood that the material consideration that we need to concern ourselves with is the possibility of any sort of increased activity at the house and more traffic, more visits, more noise. Is that the sole scope of it? Is that the only point that we should be considering at this point, in your view?
Yeah, I'm drawing out the main issues for consideration. Yeah, the impact on neighbours and also whether you think this is a suitable location in terms of its geography relative to local services and relative to local neighbours. So, yes.
Thank you. It does state quite clearly in the documentation, and I think we sort of saw in our site visit ourselves this morning that this is about the use of the building, and no physical changes are planned internally or externally. I was struck looking over the site by the condition of the fence down one side, and in particular, sort of interesting feature, there appeared to be a gate with a sliding bolt on it to the next property, which I'm sure is fine between the sort of two houses of neighbours who get on well together. But I do wonder whether this is appropriate, and I don't know obviously what regulations and requirements Ofsted might impose on this home. I'm just a bit concerned, having seen this, that this isn't what I would expect to see on a facility where children are housed. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if the applicant or any neighbours had any concerns, neighbours could erect fencing. Equally, the applicant could choose to do that as well if they wanted to, and if the care providers or Ofsted stipulated that as a requirement, then they would have to do that, and then they can put up fencing and any boundary treatment up to 2 metres in height without planning permission in any event. But if members are concerned about that, and if that would, I suppose, address any concerns, that could be the imposition of a planning condition to say that fencing should be erected before the use commences.
Okay, thanks. But just to be clear, then that isn't decisive in planning terms. That's not something that ought to have been required, and hasn't been. Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on that point before I go to my question that I was going to ask, or my point I was going to make. If we need to fence these vulnerable children in or out of other properties, or whichever way round you want to look at it, it's clearly not the right place for them. Now, going back to them being very vulnerable children, and they could come from anywhere, but they're going to have to go to school fairly locally. Our schools in the neighbourhood, I know, are always very oversubscribed. So if we've got this constant flux of children changing, how do the schools manage that, really? And with them being different age groups, maybe going to different schools, surely that would increase traffic for pick up and drop off, and things like that. So has that been considered?
Yeah, the local education authority would have the legal. Yeah, the local education authority would have the legal requirement to provide their education. Being looked after children who would fall within that category, and they would have the choice of school to go to. I suppose the consideration for members is the occupation of this property by 3 children any different than it could be as a semi-detached property with 2, 3 or 4. So in that regard, from an officer's perspective, there isn't much material difference in terms of the amount of children and the impact that would cause on the educational system. It's very, very negligible in our view. In terms of transport, yeah, it's a similar scenario as well. You have to compare it to the existing situation whereby you have a property again that could be occupied by 2, 3, 4 children. So in terms of the transport links, it's not materially different in our view.
Are you wanting to come back, Councillor Smith?
I think we might have to beg to differ on that a little bit, because I do see that, I do see what you're saying insofar as if they were from one family or one family unit, they would then potentially be going to one school, and the older child, if they were at high school, perhaps going there under their own means. With looked after children, they will be receiving the transport to the school, I would suggest. So that wouldn't be the same as if it were just one family unit, and that would be, at least twice a day, 5 days a week during school time.
Sorry, just briefly. We're making a lot of assumptions here about the children and the operation of a single family unit. I mean, there's nothing to say that actually you may have a family. It's a 5-bedroomed house, so you could potentially have 2 parents, which is 2 people, and then 4 bedrooms occupied by 1 or more children that could all be going to different schools and have different needs themselves, regardless of whether they're actually in the care system or not. So I think it's a little bit of a red herring, the questions of this nature, to be honest with you, because the key thing really is how different is it to its operation as a C3 house that had 2 parents. Simple as that.
Thanks, Steve. I'll come to Councillor Manaka.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate on Councillor Rontree's and the introduction on paragraph 1, we were given that, I know that that's for the rejection of, the plan itself. We've been given that the neighbour is an elderly lady. So just as a consideration, I would suggest a consideration for the fence, in case if that will make any difference. And it's just purely because of the fact that there's an elderly person there, just as a consideration. Not that they need to do it. I don't know. I'm just
Sorry, Adam. Chair, my comment on that would be a similar response, I think, to Councillor Smith. That's an assumption that the elderly lady next door actually wants a 2 metre high fence, and she actually may not for various reasons. But again, as Adam had said before, and just to reiterate that, under permitted development rights, either the person next door or the operators of this home could actually erect a 2 metre fence if at some point in the future it was felt it was necessary. So really, I'm not something that I think that's something we should impose, because if that was to be done by as a condition, as I say, we might be creating a condition that actually nobody really wants.
Councillor Rowntree, you wanted to come in again? And then just before you do, sorry, if anyone has any final comments that they'd like to make to officers, if you can wave at this point, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, and following on from earlier comments and what Councillor Smith said as well, that I don't want the record to suggest that I was advocating fencing children in any way. That wasn't what I was thinking at all. I was simply thinking about that fence in the sense that, well, I wouldn't want a connecting gate in my fence with my neighbour's property on my own house, and just at that kind of level. Just to make that clear. Thank you.
And finally, then, Councillor Ray. Questions? Okay. In which case, we will move on to comments, and I'll start with Councillor Ray. Any other indications?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And listening to the debate between members, I'm a little bit perplexed. You know, we've been quite clearly told what we're making a consideration on, which are material considerations about the property going from one type of use to another. We've had a strange debate about how long is a piece of string in terms of the number of children that can go into a property. If anything, this will more regulate the number of children that can go into that property, because effectively it will be controlled by the requirements of Ofsted, which is obviously an authority that is not here today and can't speak for it and is of a different regulatory regime. I suppose the material consideration, actually, the only one actually I think that's come out of this is obviously the consideration of noise. But then again, we have a different legal structure in place to deal with any requirements around noise. So I think the fundamental principle that you have a 5-bed property which could have any number of children in it, any number of people, over a multi-generational household with multiple cars, to a much more structured, regulated environment with on-site provision 24 hours a day for the children, with a limited number of children, with controlled, regulated transport for them to access school, and a wraparound care process. Those arguments don't add up, frankly, and are trying to find a problem that doesn't exist. The fundamentals of this application is, should this be a 5-bed residential property for a family to use, a multi-generational family, any family to use, or should it be a property that can be used for look after children, bearing in mind the acute issues we have in this city? And I think on that very basis, if we're just looking at the material planning consideration that's before us, there's absolutely no logical reason to turn down this application.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. Councillor Finnegan.
Oh. And I'll shout if I have to. It's a strange world that we live in when we have a Tory talking about the private sector failing and the Labour Party propping up the private sector. It's a strange, surreal experience where we are at this particular point. And the point to be made about this ultimately is we need to be looking at, stop whinging, we need to be looking at some additional evidence that might have an impact on a material planning application. Primarily, we're in a situation where if the evidence shows that the private sector do provide greater problems and difficulties in terms of their care provision, and that impacts on residential amenity, then the very least we should be doing is having a look at that evidence and deferring it. Now, maybe my colleagues over there will find that the evidence is not relevant, and therefore at that particular point, come to the conclusion that they seem to be coming to at this particular stage. But at a point where we're told also that we've got good public transport routes without any evidence to suggest of the regularity or where these public transport routes go to, and we're prepared to just accept that on that particular assurances without the evidence. So we're two lots of evidence here at this particular stage that we ought to seriously be reflecting on before we come to a conclusion. It would appear that colleagues don't want to see that evidence, and as such, I can't really support this application because I haven't seen the full story. I haven't seen all of the relevant evidence that might have an impact on material considerations on this particular application.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think this is the right location for this type of establishment. I mean, the home isn't suitable in my opinion. I know what you're saying. It's not, but in my opinion, it's not suitable. The public transport links aren't there that you say are there. I don't think that the road will cope with the additional traffic. I think there will be additional noise and disturbance to a very settled area. And I just think that it's not the right place. I'm concerned that there's very little for the young people to do in that area, and that, you know, may or may not cause its own problems. And all right, you can say that how long's a piece of string, and I'm worrying about problems that don't exist, but we have a situation where we don't have problems there. We are potentially creating problems there. I think there are better locations for this.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Actually, Councillor Smith just said exactly what I was going to say. And you also talked about, at one point, the parking, having two cars parked in the back garden. Well, to me, it strikes me already that area in the back is very restricted and is a restricted area for children to play in anyway. So even with one car, when you look at the site in itself, there isn't a great lot of room for children to play in itself. And human nature as it is, you may provide people, and I know people argue that this isn't the point, but you've got 3 parking spaces, but people, when you look everywhere, don't park in the drives. And so on that street, there are a lot of people doing off-road parking. Obviously, some didn't have the drives, but it just seems to me create more congestion on the streets.
Thank you. Steve, can I get you to sum up, please? Oh, okay, yeah, very quickly, Councillor Gavani.
We're looking here, as Councillor Ray said, at change of a family home to a residential home. What differences does that bring? Car parking, next to none. Noise, potentially, there may be. Potentially, there's noise from families. We've had in my cul-de-sac, we had a family move in, they were there 6 months and then moved out. They caused bedlam. Noise can happen with any sort of family, regardless of size. Have we seen anything that would mitigate against this? I don't think we have. Now, it would be great if the council could house in its own run homes all the children it needs to. But since 2010, we've seen this become harder and harder due to cuts in funding, and councils up and down the country are crying about this. They've all got the same problem, and it's a problem that could easily be solved by giving the councils the money to do it themselves. It's not a case, as Councillor Finnegan says, as we're supporting and propping up private business. It's a matter of need. So I can see, I've not heard anything to persuade me otherwise, I can see no problems with this at all.
Thank you, Councillor Gavani. So I will now move to Steve to sum up the debate, please.
Sorry, I wouldn't necessarily normally sum up the debate, but because you do have a substantive motion in front of which is a recommendation to grant it. But before we get there, I just wanted to say and reiterate that actually the distinction between a public or a private sector run home is irrelevant in this forum. And even if we were to provide the information that Councillor Finnegan's asking for, my question to the panel would be, what would you do with it? Because the situation could happen again with the C3 use. And as Councillor Hayes articulated, you could have any number of children who may have their own special needs and maybe part of a single family unit, etc. So I just wanted to make that clear. Talking about the car parking, it's the same issue in a way, really, isn't it? That people who have driveways make a decision as to whether they want to use it or not. There was evidence today on site directly opposite where people were actually using the driveways, but there was evidence where people were parking on the street as well. Again, if it was a C3 unit, the same dilemma would be there. So, in a way, again, it's a bit of a red herring, I think. So really, all I want to say is you have the recommendation in front of you to grant the planning permission. We've already had a motion, which was to defer it, which was not carried. So it's whether somebody wants to propose and second the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Ray's proposed the recommendation. And Councillor Gavani has seconded. All those in favour?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And against? Which leaves us with nobody to abstain. Meaning the motion is carried. Just before I move on to the next one, I feel both as an adoptive parent and also as a councillor that it's really important. It's really important for me to take a moment just in case any of our children looked after or anyone with care experience is reading these papers, notwithstanding all the stuff in there that is legitimate. There were some comments in there that I think are relatively offensive. And I just wanted to reiterate to anyone that is watching this, that actually you bring a huge amount of value to our community and to our city. And with that, we will move on to agenda item number 8, which is a reserved matters application for 57 dwellings, including provision of public open space and associated infrastructure. Just for anyone watching live, we're just getting the laptops and the tech set up. Okay, and if we can now present the application, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to a reserved matters application for 57 dwellings, including the provision of open space and associated infrastructure relating to scale, layout, appearance and landscaping in relation to an earlier outline permission granted in 2018 for land south of Poole Road in Poole. Next slide, please, Dan. Right. So before I start, I'll just give you a couple of updates. So since the publication of the report, we've received some additional representations. One of these has come from councillors Barry and Caroline Anderson, The letter reiterates comments which have been made previously and covered within the report in terms of building materials, relationship to the gas pipeline, separation distances, biodiversity, boundary treatments, drainage, and the inspector's previous appeal decisions. The letter also raises points in terms of enforcement of conditions and lack of consultation between the developers and local residents. A few additional late letters have also been received from neighbouring residents. A lot of these cover issues which have already been covered. One of the letters raises a concern in relation to some earth mounds that are proposed within the landscaping areas. I'll point these out when we get to them. But essentially we've attached a planning condition. Well, we've suggested a planning condition in relation to details of the mounds. And given the width of these mounds and discussions with the developers, we're not expecting these to be of any particular height that give rise to any issues, such as the neighbours pointed out, such as loss of light and impact on views, which essentially is not a material planning matter anyway. So we don't consider these are likely to give rise to any amenity issues, but I'll cover this off when we get a bit further down. Another letter from a resident raised concerns about some additional plans being put online without consultation on these. And essentially these were just small incremental changes which didn't require additional consultation, and in particular the last ones were just a colour version of the house types as well as a 3D representation of existing plans. So it was essentially additional information as opposed to a change in circumstances. And an additional note was also received from another neighbouring resident, and they're on the list to speak today, so I'm sure you'll hear their concerns in this regard. So just another key point to update you on. Since the publication of the officer report, we've managed to secure the agreement with the developers to increase the number of stone properties from 3, which I'm going to show you on the plans, to 7. And I'll highlight where these are when I run through the designs. And this will help to create a more meaningful cluster of stone properties at the gateway of the site. And the developers also agreed to amend the boundary details as were originally shown. So these are going to natural stone walling to match, as well as an estate railing. So in light of these changes, officers now recommending that members seek to defer and delegate the final approval to the Chief Planning Officer, subject to the receipt of these plans which show the change in materials. These changes also be run past the chair prior to signing those off. So in terms of the scheme, in front of you, there's the red line boundary. So this shows the extent of the site. Essentially, it's a residential extension to the northwest edge of the settlement of Poole, and it's a former past safeguarded land site which dates back from the UDP dates, and it now benefits from outline planning permission for residential development as outlined in the report. Next slide, please. And this is just an aerial view. So our site is along the western edge there of Poole and Wharfdale. And as you can see from that and from the site visit this morning, there's no natural boundary to the site. It's the middle of a field, effectively, with the Church Lane private road running across the middle. Just to orientate yourself as well, the Shell garage is there to the north, and then there's the bridge just beyond that which extends up towards Harrogate, and then the River Wharf also extends to the north just beyond the site. Next slide, please. And this is just wider context. So Poole's essentially a small village which is surrounded by greenbelt land. There's some limited development and industrial uses just to the west of the site which lie within the greenbelt. But yeah, as I previously pointed out, it's essentially a residential extension to the northwestern edge of the settlement. Next slide, please. This is an extract from the conservation area appraisal. So the whole of the eastern side of the site and beyond lies within the pool conservation area. So for sites within the setting of this conservation area, and this is an extract from character area 4, which is the purple. So on our site there lies where it says pool on the left hand side of that purple edge, and just to the north of that as well. And some things to point out here are the positive building, which is dark green, just to the north near the road. And essentially it's one of the few limited positive buildings within this character area, but it's also adjacent to the historic core, which is the pinky area. And this character area 4, which it lies adjacent to, is described as an area with a strong variation in character and appearance. The 20th century housing areas share distinct suburban appearance that unites them. Next picture, please. So this is the access to the site. So this access from Pool Road's already been agreed through the outline. It's not a matter for this reserve matters application. And you can see on the left-hand side there's a line of residential developments which lie quite close to that boundary. And you can also note the change in topography. So you have quite a steep change in topography at this part of the site. And as we went in towards the centre of the site, it was much flatter. So that building on the left hand side there is the positive building which was highlighted on the conservation area appraisal. And you can see from this view here, you get some glimpses of render to the side elevations as well. And then the backdrop is, of course, the Chevin up there. So this is towards the bottom of the Wharf Valley with the river just below us. And there are some long range views which I'll point out as we go further along. So next slide, please. This is just adjacent to that positive building at the site entrance. So this just shows a style of some of the neighbouring properties. So there you've got a red brick, a red roof tile and some render as well. Next slide, please. This is within the site. So this is the private highway which splits the site essentially. And these on the right hand side here are the backs of some of the positive buildings which lie within this historic core element of the proposal. But this access road at this point doesn't actually lie within the red line boundary, and the new housing will be going to the left hand side here. Next slide, please. And this is just looking back the other way. So you see those positive stone properties on the left there, and longer range views. Next slide, please. And this is where we stood today on site when we were trying to get away from the tractor that was covering us in muck. And this really gives you an idea of the relationship with the neighbouring properties along that side. That hedge, which is down there, is to be retained. You can see on the right hand side there's a more modern suburban dwelling, which it probably dates from the late 70s. Yeah, and it's a good picture just to show that there's nothing to define that western edge of the site at the moment. Next page, please. And this is the estate that we drove into. So it's called Church Close, which Church Close goes on beyond this estate, but we had a quick look around here, and this is an existing development which lies within the extent of a conservation area. So the proposed site will lie directly behind these dwellings. So these are of more limited architectural merit than the ones that we've seen previously, and the palette of materials is made up of brick render and concrete tile roofs with UPVC windows as well. And you can see some fencing in quite prominent locations. So if we just do the next one as well, Dan. So this is another picture from the same estate that lies adjacent. Next one as well, please. And this is just a final one here, so showing some gable details. But it gives you an idea of what the southern part of the site lies next to. Next site, please. And then these are further pictures from that same character area 4, just showing the range of suburban house types that are there. There is, render is prominent in some areas. There's concrete tile roofs in some places, and it just shows where there's material splits as well. Next slide, please. And these are some of the long range views from the Chevron. So this is from the A660. It's quite a long range view from this point. There is views further away from higher up on the Chevron, and there's some a bit nearer from Otley Old Road. No, sorry, Old Pull Bank, which is access only now. So if we look at the next one, this is zoomed in a bit. So essentially from this view, what you're seeing is, you see the basic form of a two-storey dwelling, uncluttered roof lines, the chimneys. You see the stone building material, you see glimpses of veranda, and within a landscape setting. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed layout. I'll just cover off the changes to the proposed material. So if you look at the blue properties there, they're the ones that are going to be constructed fully of stone. And then there's two yellow properties that lie directly below the two on the right hand side, and both those semi-detached pairs are proposed to be stone now. So that's considered to be an improvement. And if we look at the rest of the materials, so the yellow ones are a stone render mix, and I'll show you the house types in a bit. And then as we get to the southern part of the site, it's a brick render mix. So you've got a graduation of the materials as you go through the site, and define character areas as well. So in terms of this layout, you've obviously got the access coming in from the north there, so from Pool Road. So that was agreed at outline. Then you've got the main access road to the western edge of the site. And that generally demarks the greenbelt boundary. So anything to the left of that road is within the greenbelt. The dwellings are a mix of detached and semi-detached dwellings ranging between 2 and 4 bed. And the layout generally addresses the streets and green spaces around there. And then in terms of the separation distances, these are generally greater than to the dwellings on the right. These are generally greater than what was previously discussed at the last appeal, and it didn't form one of the inspector's reasons for refusal on that appeal. There's just one dwelling which has been brought slightly closer, which will cover off when I come to the main points, but it's the second blue dwelling down there, and that's been moved about 10.1 metres from that rear boundary. As you can see, the relationship to the south there, so those dwellings have kind of an offset relationship with that estate that we went around, so there's no concerns in that regard. And then the central ones have got this green space buffer to the dwellings that lie the other side of that access road. Also, in terms of this plan, just point out that the line of the gas pipelines marked with the dash line to the western side. So you can see it abuts the access road. Well, the easement abuts the access road to the southern aspect, and it goes further away as you travel north. There's 3 main green spaces. So there's green spaces. So there's the area to the north by the entrance, a central linear area, and a small area to the south. And these are essentially the same as the previous scheme which went to appeal and the inspector found to be acceptable. Then there's a 4th green space area to the northwest, which will be a drainage attenuation area. And then you may have seen the mention to the Wharfdale Greenway within the report. And essentially, the linear green space which splits the site north-south would provide a new point of access for the greenway to the western edge, and that would link in with the existing settlement to the right. And this is identical to the previous appeal proposals, which were considered to be acceptable in that regard. Next plan, please, Dan. So this is essentially the landscaping scheme, so it gives a bit more detail in that regard. A key point is that the key existing trees which are to be retained on the boundaries in the southern area, they're to be retained, and then there's quite a lot of enhancement of new trees going in, new tree-lined streets, and landscape front gardens, etc. To the north there, so just to the north of the northernmost dwelling, there's 2 hatched areas there, and we've agreed with the developers that we're going to ask for the details of this planting via a condition, because what we don't want, given the relationship of those planting areas to the adjacent dwellings, is any species which are going to grow too tall and potentially, cause issues further down the line, block the light of the neighbouring properties. So we'll be putting a condition on requesting those details, and essentially it'll be a low level planting area for there. And then in terms of the mounds, you might not be able to see from the naked eye here, but the linear strip that goes east-west in the middle, just either side of those roads there's some mounds demarked. And essentially we're going to ask for details of that through the planning conditions. But when I've measured them, at the widest point, they tend to be 5 metres, which is like the length of a car parking space. So as you can imagine, you can't go too high across such a shorter distance. So we're not expecting for there to create a bit of interest really in what is a linear piece of green space, other than, rather than creating an amenity issue for the neighbours. Next page, please. Slide even. This shows a cross section of some of the levels to the neighbouring properties. They relate to the red lines that you can see on the right hand plan there as you go down. So the one that we were looking for more details on is B really, and that shows that bungalow on a slightly lower level. And you can appreciate from going out on site today and seeing the pictures of the land level differences there, and they've been taken into account when we've considered the application. Next slide, please. And this is a comparison really. So you've got the layout of the scheme in front of you on the left hand side, and the previous scheme that went to appeal on the right. So it is very similar in that regard, and essentially the inspector, the reasons for appeals are related to design and appearance and impact on the conservation area rather than layout issues, green space, etc. Next plan, please. So this is one of the previous house types which the previous inspector threw out. So some of the key issues with the previous scheme were the developers were proposing a material palette of buff brick, so which is like a yellow orangey brick, and art stone and the concrete tar roofs, which didn't have much context for the area. And in particular, the inspector didn't like this house type, which had a very tall roof and a dormer window. And as you'll note before, I've talked about the uncluttered nature of the nearby roof lines. And what was the pattern of these house types was that the quality of the scheme from front to back. So if you look at the front elevation there, you've got dressed windows with heads and sills, and then when you get to the rear, it's kind of being left with no detail in there. And importantly, there's no chimneys either. So if we move on to what's proposed now, next slide, please, Dan. These are some of the stone properties. So you've got more ordered facades, better materials. You've got the chimneys there, and you've got the front to back quality as well, with the windows to the rear being dressed. Next, please, Dan. These are some of the stone render ones, so you can see that split. So there's stone renders to the front elevation, and you've got a coin detail that runs around the edges and brings that material in towards the sides and rear. And next slide, please. These are just another couple of versions of the plans, but as you can see, in terms of the alignment of the windows and the detailings have come on a long way since the previous versions. Next slide, please. And these are some of the brick render ones. So these are going to go to the south, which is the more shielded area of the site, adjacent to that estate, which had the brick and render properties. And again, they're of quite simple design. Next slide, please. And they're just the final few. Next slide, please, Dan. And then this is just a 3D representation which kind of knits together all the issues which we've been covering. So you can see there the two-story scale of the dwellings, the character areas, how the green space is linked, the tree-lined streets. So in terms of the main issues, as laid out in the report, the site benefits from extant outline consent for residential development, which includes the access from Poole Road, which was granted at appeal. As such, the principle of residential development is acceptable. This outline consent considered all matters that went to the heart of the permission, such as general sustainability, accessibility, capacity, affordable housing provision, improvements to the highway network, flood risk and drainage, for example. And the inspector also gave account of the site's relationship to the gas pipeline and the Wharfdale Greenway. Some of the matters, such as drainage, were mitigated by conditions attached to the outline, and these will need to be discharged before development commences. Other matters, such as the landscape buffer, so you can see there, a landscape buffer is proposed to the western side, were covered in the Section 106 agreement, which required details to be submitted prior to development. So as such, the scope of this plan application is limited to the reserve matters, which are appearance, landscaping, layout, scale, and access other than from the main pool road. So for clarity, there's no scope to reconsider matters which have been dealt with or should have been dealt with at the outline stage. For example, a lot of the comments that have been received relate to flood risk. However, this was a matter dealt with at outline stage, and the inspector placed an appropriate planning condition and requiring a drainage and foul sewerage scheme to be submitted and agreed in writing prior to the commencement of development. And essentially that process will go ahead following the grant of the reserve matters. So for instance, drainage is not a matter that falls within the scope of the reserve matters because it doesn't relate to appearance, landscaping, layout or scale. You'll note the site's got a long history in terms of appeals, so we've twice tried to prevent residential development on here. We lost the outline that was due to not having a 5-year housing land supply at the time, and we also tried to refuse the previous reserve matters application for a variety of reasons, and we essentially won that appeal on the one matter, which was the impact on the conservation area and in particular design and appearance of the dwellings. An important point to point out is that the outline consent was granted prior to the core strategy review, which brought in a raft of new policies on important issues such as climate change adaptation, space standards and accessible housing. And whilst these are very important matters, that they go to the heart of the permission and are not issues that fall within the scope of this reserve matters application. In terms of the gas pipeline, I outlined where that is in relation to the sites, and it essentially clips a 6-metre easement from the pipeline towards the south of the site, towards where those brick houses are, and it's the road that lies adjacent to it. So you'll note from the report that Northern Gas have objected, and their latest correspondence requests a risk assessment to be undertaken. However, essentially this is a principal matter that goes to the heart of the permission, and it was an issue dealt with at outline stage when the previous inspector attached a planning condition requiring the developers to submit information in relation to compliance with a Northern Gas publication. So this is quite a meaty document that they need to comply with, and that includes a variety of requirements such as safe digging practices, excavation, mechanical excavation restrictions, requirements for construction traffic, blasting and piling restrictions and drainage. So they'll need to show how they comply with this document prior to being able to start on site. And we will also seek Northern Gas's comments on that condition discharge when it comes in. Importantly, the developers also require separate formal consent from Northern Gas to do any work close to the pipeline. In terms of the health risk from the pipeline, we've consulted the health and safety executive, who are the statutory consultee, and comment on safety grounds, whether or not planning permission should be granted on safety grounds given the increased population near to the hazard, which is the pipeline in this regard. The HSC haven't raised any objections to this application, and essentially this request for a risk assessment is a new requirement above and beyond what was set out at outline stage. And there's nothing in the outline consent or the Section 106 to secure this, and it goes beyond the expectations and falls out the scope of a reserve matters application. However, safeguards are still in place through this condition discharge, which they'll need to do, and the requirement for separate Northern Gas consent to work close to the pipeline. In terms of the Greenway, as I pointed out, it's an identical situation to the previous appeal. Whilst we'd want to see more details in that regard, we put forward very strong arguments which the inspector didn't agree with. There's no justification to depart from the inspector's previous comments in regarding the east-west link and potential link to a wider cycle path in the future. In terms of landscape buffer, that's secured by the Section 106 agreement, and the developers will need to deliver that alongside this development. And then finally, in terms of the previous appeal decisions were very good in funneling what are the residual matters on the scheme, and essentially that's in relation to the impact on the conservation area and the design and appearance of the house type. So you'll have seen when we've looked at the various house types on site adjacent, as well as what was previously proposed and what's now proposed, we've seen a massive uplift in the quality of the materials that are now proposed. We've now got character areas. It's a more logical transition between the materials and how they relate to the neighbouring areas. They've got important detail in such as the heads and sills and the chimneys. You've got that front to back quality between the dwellings, and they're of simple form with uncluttered roofs. So we think now that what they've put forward is acceptable in terms of the setting of the conservation area, and it's overcome that previous reason for refusal. So we're looking to approve a scheme subject to the revised recommendation, which I laid out previously, which is essentially to defer and delegate to the chief planner following the receipt of these revised plans in relation to the change in materials. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We do have speakers against the proposal. Can I invite them now to the end table? We've got Robert Cardis, Guy Northrop and Joanna Rowling. Just for members' benefit, Councillor Barry Anderson will also be coming to join the members of the public as support, but will not be speaking. You will be able to ask questions and he will be able to assist if required. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. I've also, because there's 3 objectors, allowed 6 minutes rather than 4 minutes, which is the norm, so that it's 2 minutes per person, so that you can make a decent case. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, that one there. Yeah. Right. Anyway, I hope I finish this. The first point, all I'm saying about this development is it's entirely visible from Old Pool Bank and Pool Road. It's totally visible, changes pool forever. The last reserved matters application was turned down by the planning inspector. It was not in keeping with the conservation area nature of pool in Wharfdale. And to me, if you look at the old and new, they're tinkering around the edges, basically. And to me, the important thing is, because this is the whole nub of this argument, the council's own conservation officer's view states, and I think it says, would have a negative impact on the setting of the conservation area and would fail to preserve or enhance its character or appearance, which seems pretty damning to me. So the latest proposals to be a generic, they could build them anywhere really. So to me, Leeds City Council have an opportunity to enhance pool in Wharfdale with a mix of houses constructed in stone, artificial stone, layout that the council could be proud of. There's plenty of natural artificial stone being used in other sympathetic developments. Even in Bradford, Keepmoat were putting up houses using stone. And the other thing I want to mention is the Boston Spa development, which is a nice development. It's joined up blooming thinking. You know, it's decent planning. It looks nice. It's a good scheme. Why don't we do something like that in Poole? So it's not a situation of houses. You know, I accept we need houses. So this is a case of making a nice scheme for the future. All it means is that the developer and landowner gets a bit less profit. It's as easy as that. And finally, I've just got one point. I cannot understand why one of the houses has moved closer to my house when it was actually approved in the original application as being further away. So I respectively say we should refuse it and get another one in.
That one? Okay. So condition 10 of the outline planning approval states that no development shall commence until the details of the cycle and pedestrian route through the site suitable to form part of the Wharfdale Greenway proposals have been approved in writing by the local planning authority. I would argue that the basic condition has absolutely not been fulfilled, that the current proposals, unlike those in the outline planning approval, and I was at the public inquiry for that all those years ago, seek to take the Greenway westwards across the housing estate and abandon it in no man's land beyond the boundary of the site. This is absolutely not suitable because the point at which the route leaves the site is on top of the high pressure gas main, and this is not an ordinary gas main, this is a very serious piece of kit. And the suggestion is that it should run this Wharfdale Greenway outside the site over the pipeline for 300 metres before crossing over into the next field at the south of the site. This will be completely unacceptable as the tarmac surface would interfere with Northern Gas Network's access to the main for maintenance and emergency works. For us, the proximity of that housing estate to the high pressure gas main is absolutely terrifying in itself, whereas the positioning of a tarmac cycleway over the top of it could be absolutely catastrophic. The reality is that without the guarantee of a safe route within the site, going in the southerly direction as originally agreed, the Greenway could actually be unachievable. Now, this is a Greenway for all of us. This would be an absolute tragedy for all of our communities, as the Greenway will be a public path.
Hi, Robert Cardis. I'm a local resident. I want to speak about the gas main, which is still very much in abeyance. There's been objections recently since the outline planning application, and nothing has been agreed about it. The latest comments state it's become apparent the proposed development will be in contravention to the H-type area imposed by the recent regulations with the building proximity distance of less than 3 metres. The population corridor of 352 metres, which covers most, if not all, of the development. We've spoken with Northern Gas Networks just this morning, and they've confirmed that nothing has moved forward or been addressed. Their objection very much stands. We were told that neither the applicant nor Leeds City Council has engaged properly with them to resolve any issue. They are adamantly against the build. He did say it's a major concern, and while they haven't had any accidents in the UK with a pipeline of this size and nature, in other countries, they have had them explode with devastating consequences. Please be under no illusions. This is a main gas line from the North Sea supplying most of West Yorkshire. It is not a small gas main that can be disregarded. It's similar in magnitude to Nord Stream 1. If this application is approved while ignoring this and left to condition, all parties involved, including this panel, will be culpable if there is an accident. While Taylor Wimpey and the designers others have a vested interest in this application being approved, I wonder what their arguments would be at an inquest following a catastrophic incident and loss of life.
Thanks very much, all of you. Do you members have any questions to the speakers? No? Oh, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. How big is this pipeline? I mean, you're saying it's the main pipeline from the North Sea. You'll have to forgive my ignorance. Sorry. I mean, is it as big as this room, or?
Are you okay to just use your mic? Because otherwise they won't be able to hear it on YouTube.
Apologies. It's 4 foot below ground, and I believe it is around 1 meter in diameter. But it is a major gas line, and I don't think that's been conveyed properly up until now. Northern Gas Networks just don't want anything anywhere near this, and it's not been addressed.
So I don't know whether this is for yourself or for officers, but 4 foot underground doesn't seem very deep, considering it's such a huge pipeline.
Yeah.
This pipeline was laid on the assumption that this field would remain as pristine pasture land. You know, it was not anticipated when the pipeline was laid. This is carrying gas from one coast to the other. You know, this is going right across the country, and it's supplying all the other systems. So obviously, when it was laid, there was no thought that there might be buildings coming over the top of it, a greenway coming over the top of it, roads coming over the top of it, goodness knows what.
It's not possible, sorry. It's not possible to put the tarmac and the greenway over the top of it because you can't do any building works or dig anywhere near it. So the putting the greenway where they've proposed absolutely cannot happen. And none of this is being addressed.
I'm just going to slide a question in from me just while we're on the greenway. So if the greenway can't go over the pipe and the pipe goes from coast to coast, would it not stop the greenway from going anyway? Because you wouldn't be able to half a mile up the road either, I guess.
Roads can cross it. Roads do cross it. I mean, the little lane that those of you who did the site visit will have been on this morning, and the road above and the main road all cross it, but that's not the same as having a length of it with development, in this case, a road, because a greenway is a small tarmac road. It has to take cycles, wheelchairs, pedestrians, horses. You know, it's a small tarmac road. Things.
Okay, apologies. I accidentally turned your mic off there. I thought you'd finished and I went to go in and it just closes everyone down. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to come to Councillor Gavani, but it's probably worth for members us picking this up again rather than questioning you guys for much longer on technical stuff with officers later.
It is on a different issue, Chair. The first gentleman that spoke, he seemed to be opposing the appearance of the houses and the materials used. Yet on the site visit, we're told that adjacent to the property nearest the road, that's a feature property of the area, there would be stone built. And actually, the planning officer said there's an additional 2 properties, and that's shown in the plans, that will be stone built as well. And the rest of the properties, from what we saw of the estate as we came in, the rest of the properties match those in that estate, a mixture of brick and render. Could you explain and enhance on that, please?
If you have a good walk round pool, there is a mix of stone, and I walk round, I'm a walker, you know, I walk round pool, and I took some photographs because I can't remember the last development that was done in pool, but you know, that was all out of stone or artificial stone. It was church something or other. I don't know whether Barry, that development just off Old Pool Bank. So I've sent, you know, from the main street, I looked up, there was stone. You know, this, I don't know whether it's trying to get this through, you know, to me, this is trying to, you're getting sick of this now. And so to me, you're trying to push this thing through. I think there's a mix and all you're going to do is plonk a load of basically render in a massive block. My argument would be, why not have some design flair, you know, and spread the stone buildings and a bit throughout the site? Because it's going to be a feature, isn't it, of Poole forever. This is what you're going to see when you actually approach from Poole Bank, Poole Road. So I just don't see a problem, you know. The tinkering around the edges, because sadly it is to do with profit, but the landowner and the developer can take a bit less, and let's make something that's bloody nice. So
could I add something quickly?
Yeah, I think this is rolling. You put your hand up first and then we'll come across.
So I actually live in the one of you when you did your site visit, you saw the backs of the 1935 terraces, which are adjacent to the lane that goes from the village, from Church Close through. And if you look at the map, the plan, you will see that all of the existing houses from the main road as far as that terrace are all 1930s or earlier, and they are all stone built. All the houses to the other side of that are from the 1955 development, which is the Church Close development, which was built in brick and render. Now, if you look at the number of houses that are supposed to be stone, in my view, they must come as far as the existing line of stone buildings. So that means they have to come as far as Manor Crescent and the buildings between there and the main road.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add?
Yes, just a quick point. The applicant has agreed, by virtue of that agreement, I think accepts that the best material to be used aesthetically is the natural stone. They've done that. They've put 3 houses and then added an additional four to try and appease it. Why, if you can do something of that quality in a conservation area that's in keeping, would you not carry that on throughout, particularly if you yourself believe that that is the best thing to do?
Thank you. I've got Councillor Bromley and then Councillor Manaka, and then we'll move to the next part. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, go for it.
Bit of the stone built properties, if you actually look at it properly from the A660 down into the site, where we've just had it described up to the corner would make sense. I accept that the properties that back on don't need to have the stone, but just have a look at what the visuals would be going from up on the A660 looking down. What I've asked for is just all the properties from the Poole Road back. So it's about the first one and a bit. So it's, well, you called it yellow. It looked orange on the map that we were looking at the site here. But if you just take it that far back, that's all we need to do. And in respect of a number of other things, the conservation officer does say clearly to preserve, that means keep as is, or enhance. And we're looking to enhance it. That's what we're trying to do, is to enhance the area, because to be really honest about it, we, planning, made mistakes in the past, and why compound them? This is your chance to right things that have gone wrong in the past by allowing those houses to be built. That's gone in the past. Whoever was responsible, what is in the past. What I'm asking for is, this is your chance to argue for what I call a marquee development. I really think, because when you come in from Otley, you want it to strike you and think that's great. If you're looking down from the A660, you're wanting to look down and think that's an area I'd like to go and live in because it looks good. We're not arguing against the houses. What we're trying to say is make them quality houses so that it fits in with the character of the area.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. So Councillor Bromley, then Councillor Manaka, please.
Thank you, Chair. In actual fact, it was more about the gas pipe, which I think I'll save for asking officers later. But I just want to add to that. Can I just clarify, is it actually across the estate aesthetically you'd prefer it all to be stone or speckled? How many exactly?
Diagram that you've got with the orangey colours on it. Right. So in other words, it's everything that what I can see in yellow, right? That's what I'm talking about. So the pink can be what Taylor Wimpey are wanting. I'm suggesting that everything in yellow there should be. Now, they've consented to another 6 or 7 or whatever it is they've consented to. All I'm asking you is to ask them go a little bit further. You know, they've shown willingness to concede a little bit more, as if by saying, oh, well, I've given you a little bit. You know, what I'm saying is go the whole hog. Just take all the yellow ones and put those into stone, and the rest I personally would be happy with if they were a mixture. So that's all I'm asking, because aesthetically, if you look from the area, you will see that you can visibly see the yellow ones from far afield, and that's what I'm talking about. The other ones should be hidden from sight in theory, should be hidden from sight in theory.
Yeah.
It would be nice if the conservation officer was happy in a way. Do you know what I mean? For them to actually say this is a nice development. You know what I mean? I don't quite get it. Joined up thinking, why, if it's next to a conservation area, why not get them involved and let's.
So we do later on have questions to officers, at which point, if panel members are minded, they can speak and ask questions to the conservation officer. Last bit.
So just in answer to that, the extent of it, I believe it should all be stone. The photo that I've been holding up is looking down the valley into Pooling Wharfdale, which is really picturesque. If where you've got the pink houses, have those in brick, you're going to see Pooling Wharfdale of mostly in stone, and this area, a patch of brick houses right smack in the centre of it as you look down the valley. I think they should all be stone.
I walked around and I've got a picture of that basically.
Thank you. Councillor Manaka.
Thank you, Chair. I think I wanted to kind of like comment on the guests, but then it's already been touched upon, and as well in terms of aesthetics. I thought there was quite a mixture of houses when we've been to the site. I think I'm not getting why we need to press on having just. I do appreciate that you. Pardon. No, it's all right. It's just comments. It's all right, sir. Thank you.
You'll have your chance for comments later. Okay. Thank you very much for coming, folks. We do have a speaker here as well in support of the application. In the same way that those objecting got 6 minutes, although there is only one agent coming in support, they also, for fairness, get 6 minutes. Maybe they are not just one person. Okay, so we've got, am I correct? It's Becky is doing the presentation. And if you would be able to just introduce the others that are with you as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I'm Becky Richmond. I'm the agent for this application. I work at Johnson Mount Planning. To my left, I have Glenn Dunkley and Jenny Purple representing Taylor Wimpey, the applicants. As you'll be aware, this application site has a detailed and extensive history. As Mr. Wilkinson has already mentioned, this is a revised proposal following a previously dismissed reserved matters appeal. It's therefore important to reiterate that not only has the principle of development already been established through the previous reserved matters, established through the outline consent, but there have also been a number of principles established through the previous reserved matters appeal. The office's report to committee sets these out in some detail, and we've already heard on that matter. If you'll allow me to take you back to 2021, I'd like to draw out some of the key matters that the inspector of the previous reserved matters appeal set out for the dismissal. I know it's odd that I'll be bringing up negative elements, but bear with me. The inspector stated that the resultant development consisted a significant mix of house types and that the styles were not readily found in the adjacent areas of the settlement. Furthermore, he said that the proposed materials were not commonly found in the local area. This has been the focus of this application in rectifying those issues, and therefore the proposals before you today are significantly different on these elements. Sat behind what you've seen and what has been presented is extensive contextual analysis that looks at the conservation area, the character areas, the appearance that can already be found, and how we can implement that into the scheme. As a result, we've got two distinctive character areas in the north and the south, and a transition of materials that move through them to make a cohesive development. Overall, there's been a reduction in the number of house types, and we've removed any 2.5-storey properties and the dormer windows. We're therefore consistent with 2-storey properties only. This is the creation of a bespoke house type. They are unique in character and appearance to Poole and Wharfdale, and you won't find these house types in Taylor Wimpey's portfolio anywhere else. The detailed analysis of the surrounding area has also made sure that we've incorporated key architectural features through the windows, doors, chimneys, etc. Through the course of the application, we've also made significant changes, including in the material palettes, which has evolved significantly. As you approach Poole and Wharfdale now, what you'll see on the western village edge is characterised by stone, render and brick properties. There is a mix, and that is replicated in the proposal before you. That viewpoint as you come along Poole Road will therefore not significantly change. In fact, it'll be improved by the extensive landscaping buffering that we're offering on that western boundary. The northern character area of the proposal includes a number of wholly stone-built properties. As you've heard today, we're now committed to a cluster of 7 and half stone and render properties. These reflect those that you will find in the locality on Poole Road and in Manor Gardens. The southern character area includes half brick and render properties, not out of character of those on Church Close. The quality of the material palette does not just stop at the dwellings, but it extends to the wider development and the street scene through high quality boundary treatments in the form of estate railings, natural stone walling and brick walling, matching those of the facing materials in each of the character areas. All roof materials are proposed as grey tiles and provide consistency across the development with this and within this edge of Poole and Wharfdale, ensuring the development assimilates with the existing settlement from those long range views. The scheme before you today has significantly evolved from earlier iterations, and we thank the council officers, both the conservation officer and the design officer and planning officers, for their time in discussing this with them to get to the point where we are today. Essentially, the inspector found no fundamental concerns with the previously proposed layout, and therefore the reserve matters has followed the same principles. I'd like to make particular note that we over-deliver on the amount of POS in relation to the core strategy requirements. We are providing extensive landscaping buffering and retaining on-site trees and hedgerows. We also have carefully considered separation distances in the northern part of the site on that eastern boundary, which has been a real cause for concern for residents, and we appreciate that. The separation distances before you today in the scheme are, if not the same as the previous reserve matters where there was no issue, or they are beyond that, they are more than that. We have added additional distances where you get property to property relationships. Where there has been slight change in the layout, it's to make room for street trees so that we are making sure the development as a whole provides an attractive environment. what this reserve matters will do, and what the approval of this reserve matters will do today, is secure a benefits package which was addressed at outline. And therefore, by approving this today, there is Section 1 package that sits behind this that includes affordable housing, the delivery of the Wharfdale Greenway, the delivery of the road to a standard that could be used as a relief road that was a requirement at outline, monies for offsite highways contributions. I just wanted to reiterate that there is a significant benefits package that sits alongside this. If I may, I'd like to use the rest of my time to address some of the matters that have been spoken about before me. The first one, the Greenway. We are aware that there were initial proposals and draft Sustrans documents which put the Greenway to the west of the existing pool boundary. What we feel is, in the alignment proposed on the plan, this mirrors that. It still brings the Greenway to the west of the settlement boundary and would allow it to be in an open countryside setting. I'm aware I'm out of time. I would love you to ask me questions on the gas issue. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Do members have any questions? Councillor Finnegan.
Can you talk me through how this mixture that you're suggesting preserves or enhances the conservation area at this particular point? You've heard the opposition argue it doesn't and that they need more stone. Just talk me through why you think it either preserves or enhances the conservation area with the package you're offering.
Thank you. What we've done is we've looked very carefully at what is already the product that's already in the conservation area. And it's important to stress that this site is not in the conservation area, but it abuts it. And therefore we're in the setting. And I understand that we therefore have to look at the preservation and conservation of the conservation area anyway. But we are not in the conservation area. What we've done is we've taken examples of those properties that are adjacent to the site on the eastern boundary. We've looked at their material palettes, their fenestrations, their proportions of windows and chimneys, and we've replicated that in the house types that you are before you today as part of this application. We have increased the amount of greenery that would be included within this as a normal residential estate, and that again provides a green buffer and green landscaping edge to what is the conservation area setting.
Okay, Councillor Ray.
I'd really like to ask you about what you understand about the gas pipe situation, if you don't mind, please.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I'd like to make set the record straight that Taylor Wimpey have engaged with Northern Gas. There has been email correspondence, there has been discussions with engineers, and we are aware of the statutory consultee responses that have come into this application. In response to that, we have written quite a detailed and lengthy response, which addresses some of the key issues that they set out in relation to construction methods, for example, no blasting and etc. That is on file and that has gone to Northern Gas. We are aware of their latest response and steps have been made, instructions have been made to instigate the risk assessment that has recently been requested. And what will happen is we are aware of the condition 14, which requires further information, and the bundle will be provided as part of the discharge of condition 14. We are not concerned that there is anything within this development proposal that is contrary to the guidance documentation that we have found and received from Northern Gas. To the extent that the landscaping plans, including the western buffer that are within the easement of the gas line, are in line with their own guidelines on tree planting in their easements, etc. Again, I'd just like to reiterate that the gas line itself is not within the red line boundary and the majority of the easement is not in the red line boundary.
Thank you. I have one question. In your presentation, I believe you said that none had moved none of the properties had moved closer. And in the previous statement from residents and in the plans that we've seen, one has moved closer. So I just wanted clarification on that, please.
My apologies if that was in error. In moving, none of the separation distances are compromised. They all meet the council's guidelines or the distances that were previously discussed as part of the appeal.
Thanks for that clarification. Councillor Bromley.
I just wondered if we're aware of any developments similar to this that have been done along the gas park line, if it is running coast to coast.
I'm sure there are. I'm afraid I can't answer that as I'm not personally aware of any at the moment. I'm looking to my colleagues just in case they... Can I bring Jenny Purple in from Taylor Wimpey? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. We as a business are currently dealing with the site in Harrogate as well. That is actually the same mains gas line. It's got the same levels of restriction. It is also, in this instance, an allocated housing site, which we have got a reserve matters application in for at the moment. We haven't had the same level of objection there as we have here from Northern Gas Network, and we think it's probably to do with an officer change in personnel. There's numerous other examples, I would say, along the length of the pipeline. There's numerous other sites allocated both in this district and in neighbouring districts for housing alongside it. We're comfortable and confident that we are compliant with what is necessary to deliver outside, as Becky has said, of the easement and not coming into contact with it.
Thank you for that. So would you say it's fair to say your risk assessment is based not hypothetical, but actually based on being able to assess what the risk is building on a site like this?
Yes, we have experience, and we're undertaking a refreshed risk assessment for this scheme, which we will have to submit both to Northern Gasworks and the council to make sure that we're comfortable before any development starts. So it will be up to date on the refreshed set of data.
Sorry, I just want to be, in my mind, I want to be clear that members understand what the easement means. And if Steve could, or Dan, somebody could just put the plan up that just shows actually how the roadway and the footpath go towards the easement, just to, if you can enlarge it as best you can. You can see the central dotted line is actually the line of the pipeline. As best as can be replicated, because I know sometimes these schemes can be slightly misleading, but we keep concentrating on the dramatic consequences or catastrophic consequences of any breach of this gas pipeline, which of course none have happened in the UK so far. But if you look there, you can see on the bottom section, I don't know whether the pointer's working, but Steve, perhaps somebody could use the mouse to just show the outer red line. So the easement is the area within which they want no development to work within, but it only just cuts into it. Having said that, I'm not dismissing any of the issues regarding safety in terms of construction work as being articulated by Becky. They still have another regime to go through to get approval anyway. So I just wanted to make sure members understood the concept of the easement and how it actually is affected. It's not directly the pipeline so much as the area they want keeping clear so that they can work upon it. But still, the onus is on the applicant to go through that approval regime, regardless of what's done today.
Thanks, Steve. I'm going to come to Councillor Gavani, and I've seen no further indications, so then we'll move on to questions to officers.
Thank you, Chair. On a slightly different point, could you cover off what sort of renewable or sustainable energy will be used on site in the new properties?
Thank you. Given the time that these properties are likely to be built, if permission is granted today, they will be built in line with the existing building regulations. And therefore, I look to my colleagues at Taylor Wimpey to elaborate if there is anything further on that.
There would be elements of solar panels on
Under Part L of the current building regulations, there will be an element of solar panelling on the roof.
Is that on all the properties?
Yes.
And what about heating of the properties?
Again, under the current building regulations, it's likely that these properties will be built and therefore gas at the moment.
Okay.
Okay, I also, in my haste, forgot my own question. I just wondered where you were anticipating, based on these plans, that children would be playing. And also, just for anyone watching, POS means public open space. I had to ask, so just in case anyone else did either.
Thank you. We've had extensive discussions, both at outline and reserve matters, in relation to the provision of on-site public open space and whether that equates to play areas. Very close to this site, there is a very high quality, extensive play area. It was therefore deemed not necessarily appropriate to have equipped play on site. There are 3 areas of public open space within the right-hand side of the main spine road, and they offer amenity areas for informal play, sitting, reading, picnicking on site. And then within walking distance, there is an extensive children's area of play.
Okay, thank you very much. He's just getting overexcited. It's for the officers. Thank you very much. And we'll now move to questions for officers. And Councillor Ray enthusiastically had already got his hand up. Thank you.
I'm always excited to ask questions. So in terms of the gas, because obviously this has been an area of concern, and I'm assuming I'm going to know what the answer to this story is, but obviously it's nice to put it onto record. Obviously, the principal authority, I'm assuming, in terms of signing that off, is actually going to be Northern Gas. Well, whoever the actual company is, or is it us that signs off? Because I'm just thinking, obviously, if they're having to try and understand the process, they're also going to have to submit. The developer's going to have to submit a plan. The statutory consultees are going to have a view on said plan. Would we then take the expert opinion of those statutory consultees as to then basically enable the development to go forward from our perspective? So effectively, there are additional checks before it actually gets to the point of development.
So the way that the condition is structured, as because this obviously was outline application that was granted an appeal. So the inspectorate applied to inspect these conditions, and it's part of quite a complex condition. It prohibits construction taking place, complete and even demolition work. So it's quite a strict condition. Within that, there's various steps that they have to take as part of a construction method statement. And within that, they must comply with the networks, Northern Gas networks. So when that's submitted to us, we will consider whether that can be appropriately discharged. We will take on board Northern Gas's comments. We will consult with the relevant expertise in-house or revert back to clarify any issues of doubt. That's a matter for us as local planning authority. Essentially, we are responsible for discharging that condition. We can refuse that condition if we're not satisfied, and they can go to appeal, but it's incumbent on us to be satisfied that Northern Rail are satisfied with the method steps. No.
No railway line.
I'm so sorry, members. Northern Gas. Does that answer your question? Yes.
So I suppose my question then to planning colleagues, do we have the relevant, bearing in mind the nature of this is obviously that it's a national asset effectively because of its import, do we have the relevant expertise within the council to make that consideration? Or if not, would that be something that we would effectively bring in to make sure it's done? Again, I'm assuming I know what the answer is, but I think it's good for public record to have that actually quoted.
Yeah, as part of the condition discharge process, we'd speak the specialist seek the specialist comments from Northern Gas, and essentially it's got to be in line with this document, which is their own document. So if it doesn't align with these policies, we'd be asking them to outline specifically what needs to be done, where the areas of objection are, and see if we can overcome those, essentially. But yeah, I mean, we'd take their specialist comments into consideration, but essentially it's up to us to sign off that discharge of condition. But as I previously said, this document also requires them to seek Northern Gas's formal consent anyway to do any work within that easement. So it's almost a separate. Us granting this reserve matters today doesn't give them permission to go, drilling next to that gas main tomorrow. But there's other steps and safeguards in place prior to them doing that. Yeah.
Just for clarity then, because I appreciate this. So effectively, we would go to Northern Gas Networks as the expert for their opinion, for them to then tell us whether or not they're happy that we've met to deal with their objections. So effectively, they're acting as objector and as a specialist advice in terms of that before we make the final sign. So either way, ultimately, Northern Gas Networks basically has to be happy because they're the one that's effectively giving us the specialist advice before we can say whether or not we're happy with the specialist advice. Right, that makes sense now, I think.
Lovely. Councillor Finnegan.
For the Conservation Officer, can you explain to me how this development preserves or enhances the conservation area, and won't it preserve and enhance it better with more stone houses?
Yeah, in my most recent set of advice, I did raise an issue with the materials at that point, and I was reflecting the advice that's laid down in the adopted conservation area appraisal and management plan, which indicates using coarse sandstone and slate roofs as a key way of preserving and enhancing the character of a particular character area 4. The advice I'm giving is on the basis that this is in the setting of, so it's not within that character area, it's the setting of. And the way I've assessed the importance of the site is that it's on a prominent gateway site to the western entrance to the to Poole. And it's also important in terms of the key long distance views, which are also identified in the conservation area appraisal. I'm also looking at the existing lay of the land, including the soft landscape, the green landscape, basically, which effectively screens the render and the brick buildings in the areas that you visited today. They're effectively screened in those long distance views by the green boundary. And that's why in my advice, I've advocated for replicating that soft landscape boundary on the new development. And I'm assured by my planning colleague that that is controlled through the 106 agreement. So since my last set of comments, there has been movement on the materials being proposed. At the point that I gave these comments, 3 houses were being delivered in natural stone, and I didn't consider that was a sufficient number to have an impact on how the development is perceived. Now the number of houses being delivered in stone's been more than doubled, and I think they're focused on the area of the development that's most visible at the gateway point to the village. Therefore, I'm happy that that group of stone buildings is now going to have enough group value to enhance the views to the new development. And I consider that the green boundary that's being controlled through the 106 agreement will mitigate the rest of the materials, just as it does at the moment with the existing buildings in the long distance views. So I'm happy with the materials now.
Were you to adopt Councillor Anderson's suggestion, proposal, wouldn't that enhance the conservation area more? Because you're talking about mitigation, that's almost like saying, yeah, well, we can cover up with greenery, and then, at that point, nobody can see it at that particular point. Looking at trying to make sure that and I think that's what Barry was suggesting, that more stone, the locations he was suggesting would enhance it in a more positive way. We're almost enhancing it in a negative way by blocking it with a load of greenery. Have I misunderstood? Is there not some merit, significant merit, to what Councillor Anderson is suggesting?
My advice has got to be proportionate. So at the moment, the edge of settlement in that location is a mixture of materials, as has been discussed, and that the green boundary provides a buffer to the long distance views, which I'm trying to protect. The development that we're considering this afternoon will be the same. So it will be the status quo. Therefore, it will preserve. It wouldn't be reasonable for me to say that the entire development needs to be in natural stone, although I would be supportive of that approach.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Manaka next.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll go back to the page 39, which is the road and access. When we were at the site, there was a car that kind of like came up. I know that they are mentioning that they will do a construction of that, or there will be like there will be no possible access for the new builds. I think I'm just trying to get some answers as to how is that going to be. Will it not then stop the house that's already there that has access right through to the house? I think I'm trying to get my mind around that. If they could just kind of like explain that for me. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Dan, can we just bring up the layout plan again? Yeah, it's a good question because it's not showing in much detail on the layout plan, but we have got, sorry, just the one before that, please. We have got a bit of a more detailed access plan, which has been submitted from by the developers. But essentially, as we saw that narrow road today, that serves a collection of properties down that right-hand side there with almost like a private drive, and that road falls outside the red line at that point, as you can see there, and we're keeping in a turning provision, etc., for the refuse vehicles. Now, as we extend further west, where we saw that car come into, there's a collection of like 4 properties in like a former like farmyard, farmstead. There's a small cluster there, and essentially what will happen is that road, that narrow road that goes all the way along, will be pedestrianised at that point, and they will access and egress onto the main road. So this new road that's come in will serve them. So I've recommended a condition in the report which shows details of how that access is going to be done in perpetuity, because what we don't want is this access to those properties blocked off at any point during the construction or anything like that, because it is their only access in and out. But essentially it's going to be an improved access because they're going to be going straight out onto the main roads, as opposed to going down that narrow road where, you know, if there was 2 cars coming either way, it's going to cause a conflict, isn't it? So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gavani.
A couple of questions. First of all, back onto the gas main, I'm afraid. If I heard correctly from the applicants, they've got works in the Harrogate area close to the gas main and seem to be getting a different response from Northern Gas than we are here. How can we ensure that Northern Gas are consistent in their view if it seems to be almost at their officer discretion? Don't know if you can answer that one at all, but
I mean, essentially, we're assessing the construction management plan against this document here. So they'll have to highlight the specific parts of this document that it doesn't relate to. The problem we've had with the Northern Gas objection at the moment is it just says objection, and when we've tried to dig a bit further, but we're not really getting to the bottom of it. And essentially, once the developer submits these detailed information about how they're going to construct it safely, and etc. They'll be able to give a more informed response to that. So essentially, we do need to see the detailed information, but this application is not the mechanism for that. It'll be dealt with separately. And as I pointed out before, this approval doesn't give them permission to change that. And if they can't safeguard, if they can't get agreement with Northern Gas, they might have to come back and revise this layout, and that's a risk that they take. Going through this mechanism. But the next logical step following this would be to produce that technical detail and seek to discharge that condition. Thank you.
My other questions are around on page 37. We've got some of the conditions that you're setting out. Items 6 and 7 in that list both say PD rights removed. I presume PD is permitted development.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, I should have put that a bit fuller, but essentially we were talking about the uncluttered roofscapes of the neighbouring properties, and essentially those ones within the conservation area don't have any permitted development rights. That's why we don't see any dormers. This one's a setting of a conservation area, so they would benefit from being able to put dormers to the rear without permission. And essentially, when that conservation area boundary was drawn, it didn't realise that there was potentially another development coming here, and we couldn't restrict it in that way. But we think there's logical reason to remove the permitted development rights for dormers in this situation.
So is that specifically dormers?
Dormers, yeah.
Because my query would be, because solar panels, addition of solar panels is a permitted development, isn't it, if I remember correctly? We heard there'll be some solar panels. So if a householder wanted to increase the number of solar panels, would they be able to?
They'd be able to do any works which lie outside of Class B, which is roof additions. So, the requirements for solar panels lie within a different class. So we've not sought to restrict those, because you've got a bit of a balancing act, haven't you, between green improvements and the impact on the design of the dwellings. So we've got to have very good reason to withdraw permitted development rights on new developments, and the government advice is don't withdraw PD rights unless you've got very good reason. So I think we have for the dormers, but I don't think we've got justification beyond that.
Thank you. Finally, we've got Councillor Smith, and then we'll move to comments.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of things that I've got in comment, but the one thing that's concerning me a little bit is the play area for the children. We've got 3 small areas of open green space, public open green space on the development. And it is in a beautiful setting with fields all around. That's superb. And we have a playground fairly close by, but if I was a parent, I wouldn't allow my child to go alone, just because the roads are so very busy. So I just wondered if there was any scope to improve any of those public open spaces so that there was something for the children to actually play with on, just some sort of play equipment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, the issue in relation to green space and the fragmented spaces in general was dealt with during the appeal, and we've not sought to depart from the inspector's conclusions on that. In terms of what's actually proposed, I think it offers informal play for general playing around. In terms of more formal play equipment, you'd expect a requirement for that to come through the outline permission or through the 106. And essentially, we've got a development for 57 units here, which is towards the the lower end of where you could be expecting formal provision, especially when there is that existing play equipment just the other side of a shell garage. I know it's not ideal in terms of the accessibility, but in terms of the actual distance to the sites, and through the outline, the inspector at the time didn't request any. Well, I'll have to double check that. But in terms of the green space monies and green space provision in general, that was dealt with at that point. So essentially, it's an identical situation to what was previously considered on the last reserve matters. So yes, it'd be great, but we don't think it's a reason not to support this proposal.
Sorry, Chair. There is another little difficulty that I'd just like to highlight, because the areas of green space were determined earlier. We normally expect a standoff distance from play areas to residential properties, because not everybody appreciates having a play area right next to your property, to be fair. And because these are relatively small areas, I think you'd have some difficulty actually imposing one anyway and then maintaining those standoff areas, in addition to what Steve said.
Thank you. We're going to move now to comments. Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's been an interesting discussion, and it's been very interesting listening to residents and the local councillor talk about this particular development. Now, I'm always concerned at a point where, in terms of preserving or enhancing, we're dependent on a condition that no one is going to cut back the greenery at this particular point. Now, once it's a condition, people will know it falls to planning enforcement to be able to enforce that condition. And should somebody in the future come and cut it all down, planning enforcement may well say it's not proportionate for us to actually do anything about it. So what we're trying to achieve is undermined by the fact that we're masking, to a degree, what we're trying to do, really. I think Paddy's suggestion of more stone houses is a positive one. I think that is something that we ought to explore if we are going to grant planning permission on this, because I have no faith at all that if we condition the greenery to remain there in a pleasant and positive way, that it will remain there and that we're going to do anything about it at that particular point. But if we say additional houses are in stone, then we're getting that preserve and enhancement built in. We're not having to rely on a condition that may or may not be enforced at some time in the future. So taking into account the fact that that's been a constant from not only the local residents, but others, I would be content, which is unusual for me, to agree planning permission at this particular point, but with the proviso that we have those additional stone houses that have been suggested and proposed by the local ward councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very, very concerned about this gas pipe. I know some of it is outside of the red line, some of it runs adjacent to the red line, but I have extreme concern regarding that. I agree with my colleague Councillor Finnegan about the stone houses. I believe there should be more stone houses. The compromise is to do them up to the area of the church. Is it Church Lane? Church Close? Church, yeah, up to the area of Church Close. So they, to match in with the row of cottages or that area, and then perhaps graduate down. And I'm aggrieved about the play area, because I do think 57 homes, I think the children will be playing out. Well, I hope the children will be playing outside, and I'd like to see them outside. Thank you.
Any further comments from members? The only comment from me is a bit of a plea, I suppose. I take the points regarding formalised play, but if developers could find a way to include informal play in terms of putting logs and other, when you're building the buns and things, to make them just that bit more exciting in terms of that informal play, I'd be grateful to see it, although it wouldn't be enough to sway me one way or another with the proposal in front of us. You want to come in, Steve?
If panel were minded to support that latter thing, we could deal with that as a condition to ask for that detail to be submitted. I don't think that's a particular issue. I mean, if everybody's finished on the comments, Chair would normally be asking me to do the summary. What I would just say is that we have in front of us obviously still the substantive motion. Well, actually it's changed slightly because Steve obviously amended it to because of the stone issue. in terms of a defer and delegate to the chief planning officer subject to receiving those additional plans and obviously running them past the chair to ensure that she's comfortable that what was asked for. I only raised that in the light of that there are two issues that were raised about the more stone and the play areas. Now, that is not on this plan, which is in front of you for determination today. So really where we are is whether we, as a panel, are supportive of what is in front of you, and therefore somebody's prepared to move that motion, or if that's defeated, whether we can articulate what the reason for that is. Because I do understand what the comments that Councillor Finnegan was making and Councillor Smith. So that's where I would leave it.
Can I, sorry, Steve, I don't want to step on toes, but there is a third option, is that you combine the points that Councillor Finnegan has raised, and that be subject to the deferral and delegate to Chief Planning Officer. And then if agreement can't be reached on those points, it would be referred back to Plans Panel for final determination.
Probably move that proposal, Chair.
Can we just, with respect, can we just have a response from the officer?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Nikki. Slight concern there, because we have raised this with the applicant before and they've not wished to do so. And obviously a deferral on that basis, knowing that information, basically means we're just coming back a month or so later to the position that we are at now. But it's up to the panel.
The point I was going to make there was, Steve, they hadn't heard our views before that. So perhaps, you know, now they've heard our views, they might be willing to move on that.
I'm just going to bring back the applicant. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate this because I know it's a little bit unorthodox. I have been given instruction that we can offer additional stone properties. That would be those that were demarcated as yellow to be wholly stone.
Chair, so in the light of what's been said by Becky, obviously we could add, we've already talked about waiting because of the defer and delegate to the Chief Planning Officer for the additional 4 properties. But if we can just quickly flick that plan up again to remind everybody, Dan, just wake you up down there. But we can add that to defer and delegate, and Becky's confirming the applicant is prepared to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Councillor Finnegan, would you like to reinstate your motion?
I move in terms of the notice, whatever the appropriate phrase is at this particular point.
Well, strictly speaking, it's not moving in terms of the notice, because the notice, in fact, is grant permission and we need to defer or delegate. So this is one of those very few times with that. So have we got somebody who's happy to propose that we defer and delegate for the Chief Officer approval, the scheme with the amendment that has just been offered by the agent?
And sorry, Chair, I'm just appreciate that. Steve did mention that there's additional conditions as well. Do you want to just remind members what those were, Steve, because I didn't capture them, so we're clear?
Yeah, so I think we're looking to defer and delegate with amendments or additions as deemed appropriate to the conditions. Just for clarity, there was an issue regarding the landscaping at the northern part of the site, and revised details for low planting there in terms of residential amenity. And something that we should have touched on was we want details of the coins that are proposed on the plans at the moment. Now, they might not be necessary as such if we're going for full stone properties, but we need to see the details of those and the cross section. And then the final point was really just in terms of condition 8, which is in terms of landscape management plan, we need an implementation plan in there as well. Thank you.
So we've got proposed by Councillor Finnegan, yeah, and seconded by Councillor Ray. Can I have all those in favour, please? and unanimous. Thank you very much. And you have earned a comfort break, guys. So we'll be back in 10 minutes. Okay, thanks very much, folks. We move on to agenda item number 9, which, just for anyone that's joining us later, we deferred at the beginning of this meeting, which means we very swiftly move on to agenda item number 10, which is the application for the erection of 120 capacity wedding venue, 40 holiday lodges and a cafe/community hub building in Alton. And if I can ask the officer to present the application, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is brought to members to gain their views on the redevelopment of a former oil storage depot to create 120 capacity wedding venue, 40 holiday lodges and a cafe/community hub building. And the proposal is a departure from the development plan. So we're here to ask panel members to make comments that will inform the progression of the scheme. This will work.
Just ask Dan.
Oh, Dan, could you just go to the next slide? Yeah, thank you. So this slide shows the site from an aerial view along with the block plan as well. So on the east of the site is the River Aire and to the west is the canal and wharf. And this also identifies the oil storage containers to the south of the site and a number of buildings relating to the previous oil storage depot use to the north and east. At present, the site floor levels are slightly lower than the surrounding areas, and the volume of the development is concentrated in smaller areas of the site. So it's important to highlight here that the site is a protected wharf, and of which there are only 3 in Leeds and only 1 is currently in use. So in addition to this, the site is located in the Greenbelt, and although it is in the Greenbelt, it is classed as previously developed land due to the oil storage use here. So if you go to the second slide. So this shows the layout of the site and the existing car park to the east and the existing car park to the north. I'll just show those on here, which is that area there and that bit there, which are the car parks. So the wedding venue sits towards the centre of the site with views over the canal and wharf, and the lodges are sited around this with a network of roads and pathways which will serve each lodge. The lodges would have parking directly outside them within the site. I know there was a question asked earlier on the site visit. So that's these little sections here, which are the car park spaces for each lodge. So to the north of the wedding venue is a community hub and cafe, and this can be accessed by anyone visiting the area, but the rest of the site would be enclosed to customers only. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this slide shows the landscaping at the site and 2 water feature ponds. There will be increased planting and biodiversity across the site, and planting wise, this equates to around 196 trees planted in that be varying in size. So if we go to the next slide, please. So this gives you a 3D impression of how the site would look, and that would be from the canal side. And to the next slide, please. This gives you a CGI impression. This is of the site's appearance in the local setting and the general spread of the development across the site. And this would be looking from the riverside, and it helps to show how the site would be raised above. This is around 3 to 4 meters above current ground levels as a development platform, and that's varying in sections across the site. We'll go to the next slide, please. So this slide shows the elevations of the wedding venue, which mixes rural materials with contemporary angled design, as well as large expanses of glazing, and this will reflect the waterways that are adjacent on either side. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this shows the internal floor plans of the wedding venue, and there's a ceremony room, a dining room, and other associated spaces which relate to the wedding venue. There's also toilets and an accessible toilet as well. And on the roof, there'd be a terrace and bar, and that's with lift access. The next slide, please. And this shows the CGI interpretation of the building. And as you can see here, it's set up slightly on an embankment with the levels raised. You can see the steps here. So the next slide, please. So this shows the plans of the community hub and cafe, which would be for the use of anyone visiting the area. As mentioned before, it wouldn't just be for customers to the wedding venue or the lodges. There's a green roof and solar panels on there as well. And the next slide, thank you. So the next few slides, they run through the design of each of the lodge types. And this gives you like a CGI image from an impression of how they'll be viewed across the water feature in the centre. So if we go to the next slide, so this is a 1-bedroom lodge type. And the next slide shows another 1-bedroom lodge type with a different roof style. The next slide shows a 2-bedroom lodge type. The next slide shows another 2-bedroom lodge type with a different roof style. And the next shows a 4-bedroom lodge type. The next shows the largest honeymoon suite lodge type. Sorry if I've run through those quite quickly. We can go back to them if anyone wants to have another look at those. And the next slide, we've got a CGI, which shows the development again internally, and the water feature and pond looking out into those lodges. So the next slide, this shows the volume of the development of the existing buildings in comparison to the proposed development. So this shows the spread of the development across the site in comparison to the existing compact development. You can see there in pink, those are the existing buildings and storage units. And then the rest of the site outside of that, it's spread a lot more across the whole site. And you can also see the levels that are raised from the existing ground level up to where the current existing development or proposed, development platform will be. And then the buildings on top of that raised site. So the next few slides here show the increased site levels, and the site levels need to be increased across the site to take into account the fact that it's in flood zone 3. So this is to prevent flooding on site. So if we could just flick through those, you can see the height of the existing ground level, which is the dotted line, and then the proposed site levels above that. And then again above that would be where the developments would sit, or the buildings would sit, sorry. So if we could go to the next slide, that shows from another angle, and the next slide as well. That's another angle there with the canal in situ there as well. So if we just go to the next slide again. So this slide is a CGI photo, and it's from the canal towpath. It's a little further up from where we stopped in our site visit earlier today. So this would be the view looking towards the site, and St. Aidan's would be located behind this image. So it's a viewpoint similar to what was requested on the site visit. So other viewpoints looking towards this side of the development could be provided if required. So the last 3 slides here is CGI interpretations, and they give an impression of how the development is proposed and how it would appear once constructed. So there have been a total of 7 objections. If we could just go back, sorry, and back again, and back again. We'll just leave it up on that slide. Thank you. So there have been a total of 7 objections from the waterway associations and residents, as well as 6 comments of support and local residents. Alton and Woodlesford Neighbourhood Plan Forum and the Leeds Civic Trust have offered comments of support. So there are several important matters outstanding relating to the principle of the development, such as the loss of a protected wharf site, again, which I'll reiterate, there are only 3 protected wharfs across Leeds, the impact on openness of the green belt, and the impacts of flood risk at the site and the access to the site as well. So although the scheme will improve the general appearance of the site through the removal of industrial buildings and a significant number of tree planting across the site, the scheme will raise the ground levels by around 3 to 4 metres and spread the development across the entirety of the proposed site. So this has impacts on off-site flooding, the openness of the green belt, and the loss of the wharf. As members will have noticed on the site visit this morning as well, the main access route into the site is by a narrow road. And should the development come forward, we would see a large number of traffic from private cars. Furthermore, the development has poor public transport links and footpaths. Officers seek members' view on the questions contained within the report. And also, just to note, missing from the policy section is the Alton and Woodlesford Neighbourhood Plan. So my apologies for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Lydia. Okay, we do have a speaker here in support of the application, Councillor Galton, if you'd like to come and join us at the end. And we also have Andrew Windrus and Ian Fletcher, who are happy to answer any questions, although Councillor Galton will be speaking for the 4 minutes. So when you're ready, Councillor, you have 4 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Ready now. Good afternoon, Pam. The proposal for a leisure destination at the vacant ex-oil terminal site on Fleet Lane has the wholehearted endorsement of the local elected members and the wider community. The councillors find the report offered to Plans Panel members heavily and unfairly weighted towards refusal. Furthermore, in the effort to achieve this, significant omissions have been made which may be considered material considerations to overcome the strict determination according to the development plan interpreted by officers in paragraph 59. By example, in the first instance, the fully adopted Alton and Woodlesford Neighbourhood Development Plan has not been included in the relevant planning policies section offered by officers. I note that that was referred to just now, so that's much appreciated. I have provided members with copies of that fully adopted plan for their disposal to look at on the desk. This plan is relevant primarily because it's the most current policy, having been decided in 2022. You will note that other policies which are referred to in here, some of them are pretty ancient, the oldest being the Leeds Unitary Development Plan of 2006. The adopted neighbourhood plan reflects how this site fits into the wider local geography, environment and social usage, whereas the other policy documents are often narrower in focus, outdated and contradictory. The development site sits on a post-industrial landscape that after decades of restitution is an environmental asset and is the only vacant site identified as employment land outside of Rothwell Town Centre. The local community would like to see employment growth associated with the increased leisure usage of the area. This approach was endorsed by Leeds City Council itself when the area was identified for enhancement as a leisure destination in the Levelling Up Fund bid, Active Air, submitted this year. For the planning policy to classify such hospitality employment as not real jobs is appallingly contradictory and outdated. The status and sustainability of a protected wharf at this location is also overstated. Water haulage does indeed reduce the need for road freight in the abstract. However, its primary benefit on modal shift is achieved between wharves. Where wharves are situated, the goods necessarily are transported the final few miles by road haulage. An active wharf, especially associated with aggregates distribution, in this location would blight the lives of local residents and leisure visitors alike, increasing air pollution and road safety concerns. Furthermore, current commercial operators prefer to upload upstream at industrial sites near a Leeds city centre. There is also a proposal for an inland port at Sturton, which would more than accommodate current and future commercial traffic. The objection to the development's effect on the Greenbelt is also overstated. The site visit should clarify that the raising of land levels associated with the development would not represent a deterioration of views of the Greenbelt landscape compared with the current dereliction, or the alternative of piles of aggregate several metres high and haulage depots. Officers also object to parking provision being proposed in the Greenbelt. An informal car park already exists on a non-maintained concrete base, which your bus used earlier, left over from the oil terminal days, and the proposal would merely formalise and improve what is already there. To continue on the subject of parking, the current paucity of visitor facilities is a significant concern for local people accessing this area for leisure purposes. The Canal and Rivers Trust provides no public visitor parking, toilet facilities or litter bins at this location, despite the location of Lemonroy Marina and significant rented canal-side moorings. The adjacent St Aidan's RSPB Reserve is a major visitor attraction and can be accessed via a nearby bridge over the River Aire. There is only one official public car park for St Aidan's and is located 2.3 miles away. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Councillor Galton. Any questions from members on this? Councillor Finnegan.
Softball one here. Any other issues that you wish to raise at this point?
Thank you, Councillor Finnegan. I was virtually at the end of my prepared speech, but the key consideration for me is that planning should be there to enable the enrichment and betterment of our environment. And it feels, especially under paragraph 59, that such betterment is being encouraged to be ignored in order to respect written documents which are well intentioned, but in this circumstance don't deliver the optimal outcome for this locality.
Any other questions for speakers? No? In which case, thank you very much for attending. And we will move on to members' questions for officers. Councillor Finnegan, thank you.
We've been referred through to para 59. Now, if this is an old oil refinery site or whatever it might actually be, I had a similar one in my patch, and no other alternative industrial use wants to go anywhere near it because of the problems and challenges that we've actually faced at this particular point. So in terms of what could go on that, if I wanted to start oil refining again on this particular site, and that would clearly have a much more significant impact, a detrimental impact on the green belt, taking it that that's what's happened to that site previously, there's nothing to stop that happening, is there, as far as I can see, regardless of the fact that it's green belt. It's not a particularly attractive piece of green belt. Another question about freight. Do you want it at the same time? Or do you want it to go back?
So was the question part of that, is it an attractive bit of green belt?
The loss of protected wharf. So I was going to ask, there seems to be something about long-term availability for canal freight. Do we have any evidence of an increase in canal freight in and around this particular location over the last decade? Sorry, Chair.
We have some objections from local waterways associations, and they have said that the current demand for freight use is being outstripped by what the supply is that we've got. So at the moment, they're saying that there is the demand for items to be carried by freight in the area.
We see that evidence, because I'm sceptical, as people will know.
Sturton is over capacity. I don't have those. I don't have that data with me right now, but I can provide that should a full application come forward.
To be honest, I think the officers answered it. There's no evidence of additional need at this location. At Sturton, I accept, and there's some discussion and debate about Sturton, and we'd be supportive of that. It's a slightly different case, sticking it quite a distance, having done this on a boat, all the way up to this particular location, and challenging.
You said you had one further question, Councillor Finnegan?
If I start refining oil again at that particular time, what's to stop me? And that would that not be detrimental to the green belt further?
Okay.
Thing to work. I know Councillor Finnegan's used the phrase challenging, but can I just remind everybody, actually, in the way it's being done, that this is actually a position statement to tease out what members think about this proposal, if it should be taken forward or it shouldn't be. So, it's not a question of putting the officer on the spot to provide that information instantaneously now, because that's not where we are. But we can do that if it, or seek to do that if we think it exists, when it comes back as an application. I just thought it was a little bit interrogative, to be honest with you, bearing in mind it's just a position statement.
Any other questions? Councillor Rowntree.
Thank you, Chair. Two things I'd like to ask, if I may. One is about the opinion of officers that the issue of flood risk has not been adequately addressed. Up in Kirksall, we know a thing or two about flooding, and I'd just like to hear a bit more about that, and scope of what you think the risks could be. The other thing, and I'm sort of reflecting partly on what Steve has just said about with it being a position paper. It's our sort of purpose here is to determine if we take this further or not. Now, the appearance of the Alton Neighbourhood Development Plan fairly late on. I've not, as it hasn't sort of come by the usual route of papers. I'm sort of wondering about sort of exactly why it was so late on, but I do think if we have encouraging neighbourhoods to develop neighbourhood plans, and a huge amount of work goes into them, and they're then adopted by communities, we ought to take that very seriously indeed. And I would like to think that whatever is there, that and I say whatever's there because the thing having appeared a few minutes before the before we started to, considering this item, obviously I've not had a chance to look at any of it. I'd like to think that should be brought into the mix.
David, Lydia, obviously for what I picked up there, if we can just give a little bit more information of the impacts of potential flood risk, both on the site and off the site, I think is the issue. But also the neighbourhood plan. Sorry, I'm a bit confused about where this appeared from.
I'll just take the neighbourhood plan issue. Lydia mentioned in the presentation. Unfortunately, we did. That's an error on our part. It does fall within the neighbourhood plan. In terms of the actual specifics of the document, it's not an allocated site as such, but it's obviously an existing brownfield site. So Councillor Galton referenced new business and employment development, and there's a specific policy within the neighbourhood plan B1 that does allocate sites. This particular site isn't allocated, so the neighbourhood plan has no allocation for this particular site, but in some sense it doesn't need to because it is an employment site already. So just coming back to Councillor Galton's point on that, I think the actual document may have been issued by Councillor Galton himself. I suspect in the light of the omission of our report. So again, apologies for that. And if we look to bring this report back, we'll make sure that that's fully included. But like I say, that it's not specifically allocated for any particular use within the neighbourhood plan.
So on the point of flood risk at the sites, the flood risk sequential test and exception test haven't been adequately addressed. Our flooding officer in the policy team has raised an objection on this matter. Also, the flood risk assessment provided by the applicant states that there will be off-site flooding as a result of raising the development site, and the Environment Agency as well have an objection in due to the issue of flooding off-site as well as a result of the development.
Thank you. In relation to the neighbourhood plan that's been circulated, I haven't had one circulated to me. I don't think anyone up here has. And it would be ideal in future if you could just let me know that they will be being given out so that we can all access one or not access one, depending on what it is, of course.
Sorry, I hesitate to do this, but under normal circumstances, the submissions of details actually at the plans panel itself would not be accepted. Because not everybody's had the opportunity to look at it and digest the information, which includes the members, but anybody else that might be interested. I'm sorry to do that to you, Chair, but I just thought I ought to just make that clear. I mean, on this, because it's a position statement and David's clarified it was an officer error, I accept completely why Councillor Galton has raised it, but I just thought I'd make that clear. We wouldn't normally take information. And one of the earlier applications, if you recall, a photoshopped thing across the valley was shown for the pool. I mean, we might normally have actually asked that to be taken down again, but we just let it ride because it was just one individual piece of information. It's all about the probity and the fact that everybody has access to all the information, adequate time to digest it, not because I'm trying to stifle the debate.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously this is a position statement and we're trying to tease out a few different bits and pieces, hopefully that the applicants would find useful should they want to bring an application. So my points really, I suppose, it's a wedding venue for 122 people and 40 lodges. I don't think there's adequate parking being taken into consideration. I don't know how many spaces there are, but there doesn't appear to be sufficient, particularly given that most weddings take place on a weekend, and hopefully other people will be using the facilities around for their own leisure. So that was that. The flood risk management and Yorkshire Water have both said no objections in the report, and yet we know that, you know, there will be an implication to potential flooding in and around. So I'm just a bit confused about that. I was wondering about how we're going to get the services in for the lodges, because I think, if I'm right in thinking, it's got to come up that very narrow road. So that would mean disruption and loss of use of site during those works. So I think that needs to be thought about and coordinated. I was concerned about noise and light pollution, given the openness of the area, the fact that we'll be elevating the area, and we've got that bird reserve, nature reserve next to it. And then I think my final point is, if we're having these lodges in this area, what are the green credentials of them? You know, we're going to have eco lodges, or are we just going to have caravans on, you know, on speed, basically?
So coming back to the point, sorry, on cars. So each lodge would have a car parking space, as well as then there's the car parks that are outside the site. So I think the applicant's idea with the wedding venue is that everyone going to the venue would also be staying in the lodges. So I think that's that would ensure enough parking spaces for each lodge and person at the wedding venue, as well as the car parks off site as well, outside. And then with the flood risk management comments and is it the Canal and River Trust that you said, or Yorkshire Water? So they're more on the drainage comments that they've commented on. So it's the drainage of the site in terms of surface water and foul drainage. Flooding, our policy team have a flooding officer, and they have objected on the grounds of flooding, and also the Environment Agency have objected on grounds of flooding off-site. I think, was that all the questions that you?
Okay.
Oh, no. Yeah, we have actually noted that we were concerned about noise pollution and light pollution in terms of St Aidan's, and also just to the south of the site is a marina. I think it's I can't remember the name of the marina, sorry. Lemonroyd Lock, sorry. And there's a number of canal boats on there where people are residing. So we did have concerns that with the raised levels on site, that would also impact through noise travelling, especially from the bar on the roof of the wedding venue, and the terrace that's up there as well.
Can I just, if you don't mind, Chair, it just might help the debate a little bit. And it was referenced by Councillor Galton about paragraph 59. I think the purpose of this position statement is really to gather some feedback from members. You'll see from the tone of the report, there's an awful lot of policy challenges with this application. And the applicant is a little hesitant to undertake further work if ultimately you can see the the sort of direction of travel from officers currently is heading towards these are problems that we don't necessarily think can be fully resolved. If members are of a different view, then maybe the applicant will put that time and investment into undertaking further surveys, assessments, to overcome some of the technical matters. But you can see things like the green belt, we've got problems with that. We don't think additional information is going to help on that particular matter. But ultimately, if members are of a different view, then the applicant may look to provide some more information on the other matters. So that's sort of the reason why this particular report is before you, rather than officers just refusing this, because we recognise this is a difficult site. It's a bit of a mess. There's uncertainty over whether it will come forward as a wharf, etc. So that's why it's here, to help with the process, really.
Thank you. Councillor Bromley.
Thank you, Chair, and yeah, thank you for sort of going over those points of it and the officers' concerns, because I think, like, at the moment it looks so sort of visually dead almost, that the idea of an investment there seems visually pleasing, but if actual fact what's going on in the background is that there's a lot of risk factors and we're not necessarily considering everything that's going to be a long-term hazard. Then that's really important that we look into that. I just wanted to know, clarification, has there been any will from the developer to really want to look into offering any investment into long-term flood prevention of the surrounding area, not just of how they will keep their own ground flood free?
We have had a number of revised documents, and it is just a process at the minute of getting further information. It's not that there hasn't been a will necessarily from the applicants to provide that information. I think just at the moment we've just got to a stop point where the principle is that officers believe that at the moment it's a refusal or tipping towards that. But what we need from the applicant is to provide that further information. But this is why it's a panel today, is to gain from members what their thoughts are on that, so we can then either progress it to ask for further information and for the Environment Agency's objection to be overcome as well. So and our flooding policy officer as well, with the flood risk sequential test and exception test that ultimately needs to be considered.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Manaka, and then I think if officers are accepting of it, we'll move on to going question by question at that point. Is that okay? Oh, of course, yes, the green credentials of the caravans, and then we'll come to you, Councillor Manaka.
It's a caravan. Lodges.
So we've got the main building, so the 120 capacity wedding venue lodge details. So that would be BREEAM excellent, but we don't have the details of what the individual lodges would be and whether they would also be to the same standard as that. And so that would be, that's been asked for by our climate energy officer for that information, but that's just another thing which we're waiting for, dependent on the outcome of this.
Thank you. And publicly on microphone, I'd like to apologise for the use of the term caravan. I 100% blame Councillor Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In relations to the storage, and I know that it might not be relevant, but just as a comment, do we know if those silos, kind of like petroleum storage, are they empty, or do they need to be drained, or do we have any information about them? Just in relations to, the river and everything. Thank you.
I think we presume that they're empty as it's a non-active site, but any land contamination issues would be dealt with through site-specific conditions, which we've had those conversations with our land contamination officers.
Okay, in which case, members, we're going to move through the questions and I'll call for any comments on the specific questions as we go. So question 1 is, do members agree that Greenbelt policy is not satisfied? What are our thoughts around Greenbelt? Councillor Smith?
Given the current state of the site, I think this would be an enhancement.
Councillor Finnegan?
Really, just to support what my colleague's saying at this particular point, if you're going to leave it as an employment site, we'll be in another 5 years' time, potentially 10 years' time at this particular point, looking at what is an eyesore site. And while accepting what the officer said in the previous paragraph and this paragraph, it's about looking at the overall balance at this particular point. And we're all for preserving green belt that is beautiful and greenfield and daisies and all the rest of it. This is not one of those. And I think we have to be pragmatic if we wanted to move this blighted site forward. So I would say at this particular point, I'd certainly want more information on the pros and cons, which I think is what colleagues are trying to reflect at this particular point. So we don't see it quite in the same bleak way that the officers do.
Councillor Rowntree, did I see you indicate?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I am torn about this. I think it's quite clear in terms of the way that the so officers have referenced existing policy. That's pretty inarguable that Greenbelt policy is not satisfied. I'm just uncomfortable about saying anything that might knock the whole thing on the head at this stage. And I should say that I do have a very strong view on the next question when we get there. But in terms of this, I do wonder if there is. I wonder if there is scope for further investigation before definitively saying no. It's not just the sort of when we're taking these as individual questions, but it's the cumulative weight, I think, of a number of sort of separate issues. Talking about Greenbelt, talking about flood, public transport, loss of the wharf, together, and sort of policies would seem to be taking a lot of hits if we were to encourage this to go forward. And I can imagine sort of we might want to argue against where you might want to argue against setting one aside, but you start wondering when you've got that much evidence. So what's the point in having policies if you just disregard them all? And the danger of setting precedents by saying, yeah, no problem, setting precedents that could cause trouble for the future. So, it is seductive. There are some nice, some really beautiful illustrations, and sort of like what appears to be a sort of plan for doing something positive with a really difficult site. But I am troubled by the weight of the officers' advice against. And I think, as I say, I think in terms of the Greenbelt policy, I think the case that they made, their case is probably made. It's not compliant.
Thanks, Councillor Rowntree. I think Steve would like to make a comment.
Just briefly, slightly contrary to what the sort of perception that Councillor Galtman had, we're not necessarily completely saying no to this in terms of what's being brought forward. In fact, to use your word, Councillor Rowntree, we're torn on this as well. And just to free up the debate, what we're really seeking out of these questions is simply, I think what you were saying, is to whether we proceed and the applicant puts the investment into and try and answer these questions and overcome it, because ultimately you can. There's a lot to work at, I have to say, can't deny that, and you need to be appraised as panel members that there are lots of the council policies that actually stand against this. But if you want to put weight on other issues such as the economic benefits, tidying up the site, etc., you can do that, and you're not going to be held with your hand up your back if you do that. But just to free up the debate a bit, because I think we're all just slightly worried that we're going to say something we might regret later. But really, all the officers are trying to do here is to get a bit of it, and the applicant is to get a feel as to whether you think it is worthwhile pursuing this. and for what reasons. And I understand what Councillor Ronsley is saying about the flood risk issue. I mean, I just would say this for Councillor Bromley. Ultimately, this application would really be dealing with the flood risk issues it creates, not downstream or elsewhere. Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. So with that in mind, any other comments from members?
Oh, I think there are questions. Yeah. I wasn't suggesting we didn't stick to the questions. I'm just trying to free up the debate because I felt that people were worried that if they said something, they'd be saying it out of context. So if you still follow the questions, Chair, it would be helpful.
No worries. I just like rules to stick to. While we are just still on number one, though, I think for me, if I can add a comment as well, I think that the development itself is absolutely beautiful. My major concern is around the height and the impact visually on the green belt from a perspective of it being so much raised when you're on like the canal towpath. So if there was any minding to continue with this, then I would really want to be seeing impacts, the CGI image of it from where folk are going to be walking and what it looks like almost fully as a side-on view, in order to make a decision ever in the future, should that come back. If we are done with question one, just checking, then question two, do members agree that the issue of flood risk has not been resolved? Anyone want to make comment on that? Councillor Finnegan.
I'm puzzled with how, even if you build this up, that creates a further flood risk. Now, maybe it's me being dim, and most of my colleagues, I'm sure, would accept that that's probably accurate. But I don't get where, at this particular point, unless the site floods regularly, and there's no suggestion that it does, that even building it up, and I share your concerns from the towpath, and we want to see the CGI and all the rest of it, how that, by its very nature of being built up and feeding into a lot of the services that already exist, increases the flood risk anywhere. Perhaps me being dim, but either way, flood management would pick it up. Environment Agency would pick it up if there were concerns, and they would help me with my stunted thinking, I'm sure, at the appropriate time. But I'm not sure I necessarily understand the question at this stage.
So the site has flooded recently. I think within the last 5 years, I think it's flooded recently, and it is in flood zone 3A, so it is at risk to flood. Also, when you build the site up as it's raised up, it pushes flood risk elsewhere. So it is actually part of one of our policies or the Environment Agency's policies not to raise land levels to address flood risk, because that can create issues further down the line.
Well, I understand the Environment Agency. Certainly what they do is build up on the sides of rivers to make sure that those rivers don't flood. So I am more puzzled now than I was before. So certainly the Environment Agency's way of dealing with things often, because dredging, there's a debate about dredging, we could go on the rest of the afternoon, but usually what they do is build up the sides so that they don't actually flood. So I'm not sure necessarily the principle of building something up means that you invariably get floods further down. Now, I'm no flooding expert, but land drainage are, Environment Agency are, and I'd be certainly interested in hearing their comments on that. And they may be totally and utterly damning ultimately, and they will say it can't be done, and this is where you're going to get a problem. But I'm not sure this is catastrophic to an application at this particular point, because I can't see from my lowly common sense point of view where the issues are, and I'd certainly welcome additional information to be able to make a more informed decision at an appropriate time.
Chair, that's absolutely fine. I mean, I think the flavour is that the flood risk issue has not been wholly resolved, but I think we're slightly at cross purposes here, because if you'd been on the site this morning, the river, which lies directly sort of to the northwest, has got those bunds up to stop the river flooding in this direction. But what Lydia's talking about is if you build land up, you increase the runoff rates, which can enhance or increase the likelihood of flooding elsewhere. So it's slightly at cross purposes in that respect. But you know, if members ultimately are just asking more questions, that's obviously something we can come back with even further detail for. It's fairly straightforward.
Thank you. Councillor Bromley.
You just guarantee from my neighbour that literally raised her garden and landscaped it and then turfed it, that it makes a difference to the house next to it. And in terms of just going back, I don't think that this is fully resolved at all, and I would really hope that they are going to take full responsibility, since this will be something that's going to be like an income back for them, that there's going to be a long-term investment, and that it's not just necessarily what's first of all assessed, but actually what you can long-term then look back on as well. So if it turns out in like a year's time that they can see that there's been a huge impact by the fact that they didn't anticipate this, are they actually going to keep analysing as well down the line? Because this could be something that's obviously going to be a bigger and bigger thing with climate change down the line as well.
Any other comments on question 2? I think for me, I'd also want to be really clear on what surface drainage, so that we didn't have excessive surface runoff, because there are ways to minimise that. And I'd want to be able to see that that would, I imagine, be taken up within the flood risk stuff were it to come back. So question 3. Do members consider loss of a protected wharf site is justified? Councillor Galani?
Yeah, I'm not sure we've got evidence here that this would be a usable wharf. And if it was put into use, some of the roads accessing it are unsuitable for HGVs. And so I'm not sure. Yes, it might be a protected wharf, but is there the evidence of it coming into use? I don't think there is, and I think there'd be issues if it did.
Councillor Finnegan?
So
Anyone else got comments on the wharf? Okay. Do members consider the loss of an employment site is justified? Councillor Gavani?
Right, it is becoming an employment site. So the wedding, having the venue there, having the lodges there, that will create employment. So it's just a change from an industrial employment site into a services sector employment site.
Councillor Smith?
Currently, there is minimal employment opportunities at that site. The oil storage tanks are redundant, so nobody's working on them. I don't know what else is happening on the site, but it didn't look to be very much. And I consider these new jobs and new income into the area to be a far greater use of that land.
Councillor Finnegan?
At the risk of my personal self-esteem going down even lower by agreeing with my colleague over there, I agree with my colleague over there. Not doing wonders for my self-esteem, but I think he's got an absolute point on this one.
And Councillor Manaka?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just also in agreement with what they're saying. I think it is adding more employment to the area, and services, as we know, are quite what is at the moment maybe on employment that's really there, and that's a lot of people are at the moment are in need of, and possibly that area will be really good for employment. There's a lot going on for it, I think.
Thank you. I can't see any other indications on that question. So we'll move on to question 5. Do members consider the location is acceptable according to the locational policies of the plan? Any comments? Councillor Buckley?
In view of I mean, to me, this looks like a good project, but in view of the increased traffic from the wedding venue, plus you have all the walkers for the nature reserve and the canal, the infrastructure of the road and the delivery people that will come to supply the goods for the wedding venue, the road itself leading down to this site, the infrastructure of it seems quite narrow with the amount of traffic that is going to be on it. And I think that, though this project does look a good project, I think that could be a major problem. And I think quite a few people, well, it might find it difficult. I mean, you know, it has the increased parking there on the site, but we've walked around there before, and you do find that it is the weight of traffic at a weekend in particular, I think could be a problem. That's just my comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I'm just going to bring in officers on that.
Hi. Yeah, we in Highways do have some concerns about the road. It is very narrow, and we don't object to the development per se, but it does need looking at in terms of how particularly pedestrians and cyclists can get to the site, as well as traffic. In terms of traffic, you've got a site there that's quite an heavy industrial use with large vehicles being swapped for one that's going to have smaller vehicles. And from the information that we've got, we have requested more. We can't do a full assessment on it yet, but from the information that we've got, it would seem that the difference between the two is not great, really. So we need more information to be able to come to a fuller assessment. But in terms of the Highway Authority, we don't object in principle to it with some conditions and improvements. That may be looking at where the highway boundaries are and works that might be needed to accommodate these traffic flows associated with the development.
Thank you for that, John. Councillor Smith, did I see you indicate?
Thank you, Chair. Ordinarily, I would protect a green belt with my life. I don't consider this site to be green belt. I consider it to be an industrial site, and I consider this to be a reasonable use if it can be made to work in a sustainable manner. The road does concern me, access, lighting to it, that kind of thing. The competing modes of transport concern me. I do think we need to investigate a lot more. I think it's broadly acceptable, in terms of a use and in terms of a scope, but I think there are a lot of questions that need answering before we can actually get to a point of whether we can give any more of a steer really towards it. But one observation with the way the questions are actually worded, they're all worded in a very negative way, and I think they were anybody sort of reading around the edges might consider them closed questions negatively. So just that comment as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Bromley.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to add as comment for the suggestion of a water taxi to make the site accessible. Can we have that as something for serious consideration, that something similar like that's in Leeds City Centre is made as part of the Greenbelt idea to support the Greenbelt? Thank you.
Any final comments on question 5? Councillor Cavalli?
Yeah, we've had discussion, there's been a fair bit of comments about the view from the canal towpath. Now, there is some tree planting when you're looking out from the wharf to the site, but there seems to be a lack of it behind 5 of the lodges. I almost said caravans. So could we look at increased tree planting that on that side by the wharf, and if necessary, potentially removing some of those lodges to implement that?
Thanks, Councillor Gavani. Any other comments on number 5? Then I'll move to number 6, the final question. Are there any other matters that relate to the scope of consideration of this application that members wish to raise? Everyone's made their comments? I guess for me, the only thing is that I'd like to bring front and centre the light element. It's been raised already, but I would like to see that covered off in a relatively high amount of detail, just so it doesn't end up as sort of a strange bright beacon on a hill situation. Okay. Did you want to do any sort of summary? You love a summary.
I always really look forward to this. I mean, from my perspective, listening to that, I'm going to use some of the phraseology that Councillor Smith used, actually, because I think the thrust of what panel's coming back with is that broadly you think it's a good use in that area, but you've and as long as it's made to work in a sustainable manner. But there's an awful lot of convincing to do, because as we have articulated, there are a lot of policy issues against it. So that really is tossed back to the applicant, and I think they can take that away. But other specific things that I picked up, because there are pages, but fortunately they're only little pages because I forgot my other notebook. There were things about the car parking, interesting comments about the water taxi, which obviously the applicant can take away, because it would be an interesting connectivity with further up the canal towards the Leeds city centre. Although I think there's a weir somewhere which might knock that on the head, but yeah, so it's mainly about lots more convincing from the applicant. I don't know whether the applicant now will just go away and they'll have to make a commercial decision as to whether they think they've got enough support from the panel in general to actually do this further work, because there is a lot to do to overcome some of the issues. I mean, I'll capture it again for Tash in the minutes and for officers, and obviously it'll come back here. So if I've missed anything at all when I put it together, like the lighting, the impact upon the St Aidan's Nature Reserve, flood risk management, need more information on that, noise pollution. There is a couple of houses actually closer than possibly the marina is as well. If you remember, we went past them today. So there's lots to do. I think it gives us the applicant a bit of a steer, and it gives us a bit of a way forward in terms of how we approach it from this point. So it has been useful. You might not think so. And I was joking on site about, obviously, the planning officers having absolutely no sense of humour whatsoever. And I think that's quite evident in the 6 questions, isn't it? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Before I let you all go, I would just like to take a moment to recognise, for those of you watching on YouTube, you might not realise quite how much work goes into behind the scenes, making sure that the tech type stuff and all of that element comes together. And tomorrow is one of our team's last day after 39 long years on the council, which is, in fact, he started here 2 years before I was even born. No, 3 years before I was even born. I just wanted to put on record that we are really grateful for your service, Carl, and wish you a delightfully happy retirement. And I'm sure we're all very jealous of retirement. Thank you. Which brings us to agenda item number 11. The date and time of next meeting is proposed as Thursday, the 26th of October, 2023. And with that, Thank you.
Thank you.